Hey guys, tonight we are slipping into something cold, fur-lined, smoky, and slightly damp. Welcome to the deep winter nights of the Viking world, where the air smells of peat smoke and boiled turnips, and the chill seeps into your bones faster than a saga takes to mention Thor. This isn't the Hollywood Viking scene with dramatic axes and polished leather. No, you're about to survive a single, frostbitten day in a real Norse winter. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not from battle or berserkers, but from slipping on ice in homemade shoes and inhaling too much smoky air while trying to warm your toes by a fire the size of a disappointed candle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're cozy already, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before sunrise, not because you're well rested, but because a draft just blew straight through the door like it owed you money. The longhouse is dim and slightly smoky. A single guttering flame from last night's fire dances near the center pit, giving off more mood than heat. Your breath puffs visibly in front of your face, like a confused ghost trying to leave your mouth. Every joint in your body creaks as you sit up, shifting stiffly on a shared bed of straw, animal pelts, and possibly someone else's elbow. You're not sure whose. It's dark, and everyone's bundled together like anxious firewood. The floor is packed dirt, icy to the touch, and very unfriendly to bare feet. You fumble for your boots, stiff from cold, slightly damp, and possibly chewed by a rat with ambition. There's no luxury of socks, just wool wrappings that are somehow both too itchy and too thin. You mumble a prayer to any gods listening, preferably the ones with a good grip on hearth fires and foot circulation. You're not alone in your chilly misery. Around the longhouse, others stir. An old man coughs dramatically in the corner, possibly to remind everyone he's still alive. A child sneezes 4 times in a row and then burrows deeper under a fur. A goat bleats mournfully, offended by the general temperature. Everyone's breath mingles with the air, thickening it with fog and low expectations. Historians still argue whether Viking longhouses had any real insulation or whether people simply survived through sheer stubbornness. What's more certain is that these buildings were built low, narrow, and with roofs that sloped enough to shed snow, but not always the smoke. The fire pit sat in the middle, the smoke rising slowly into the roof space, filtering through wooden slats, or, if you were lucky, an actual smoke hole. If not, well, you coughed artistically until spring. You shuffle toward the fire pit and stir the coals with a stick, pretending you know what you're doing. Someone throws on more peat, and the room fills with a familiar, nose-burning haze. Peat. Nature's way of saying firewood is expensive. It doesn't burn clean, but it does the job, eventually. Sort of. Your first real task is to make yourself useful. That might mean blowing on the fire like it's your birthday, and the cake is late. Or heading out, yes, outside, to gather ice or snow for water. Either way, you're stepping into the teeth of a Norse winter with layers that make you resemble a depressed sheep. The door creaks open, and the world outside is white. Not the soft storybook snow kind, but the blinding, biting, slightly vengeful sort. Wind slices through your clothes, trees crack under the weight of frost. The sun is a rumor behind thick clouds, and the sky has that particular grey tint that screams, you won't see daylight again until April. You pull your cloak tighter, though it's mostly ceremonial at this point. Made of coarse wool, lined with fur if you're lucky. It smells faintly of smoke and goat. It's heavy and comforting and mildly embarrassing when it snags on the doorframe as you shuffle out. The snow crunches underfoot, loud, sharp, accusing. You trudge toward the stream, or maybe the well, or possibly a half-frozen barrel with dreams of being useful. The wind whips your face, and for a moment you wonder how Vikings didn't just hibernate until May. Then you remember. They didn't have the option. Life had to go on. Fires needed fuel, animals needed feeding, water needed fetching. Complaining was optional, but strongly implied by everyone's expressions. Back inside, someone's managed to get the fire going properly. The room warms slightly, from cryogenic to inhospitably chilly. A few people huddle around, hands outstretched, noses red. A dog sneezes near the door. A child throws a wooden spoon into the fire, prompting a sleepy argument that might last all day. And so the morning drips forward. One cold breath at a time. You survive by layers, low expectations, and the occasional miracle of a fur-lined seat. Someone hands you a wooden bowl, rough-hewn, a little scorched on one side, and still warm from its last contents. Inside is your breakfast, a porridge so thick it practically sighs when stirred, made from barley or oats, and occasionally upgraded with dried berries or, in luxurious times, a spoonful of butter. This morning it's just barley, chewy, nutty, a little bland. But it's warm, and that makes it precious. You eat close to the fire pit, spoon in one hand, the other warming over the coals. Occasionally you rotate like a damp loaf, so both sides defrost evenly. A sleepy conversation drifts through the room. Someone's recounting a dream about wolves in the roof beams. Someone else suggests that maybe they should lay off the fermented honey bread at night. The joke lands. Barely. Fermentation, by the way, is one of your few joys. Vikings brewed mead, beer, and occasionally stronger drinks from whatever sugars they could coax from grains, fruits, or honey. Not just for pleasure either. Drinks were often safer than water, which had a terrible habit of being shared with livestock, and sometimes worse. The fire crackles, and the longhouse begins to buzz with motion. The daily rhythm is deceptively calm. Chopping wood, feeding animals, checking traps, mending tools. There's no weekend, no holiday, no Netflix. Just chores, weather, and the occasional feast when something goes right, or very wrong. You're sent out to check the woodpile. It's always the woodpile, a sacred place of hope and disappointment. Bundled tight in your cloak, you exit into the wind again, making your way toward the lean-to structure that holds the fuel for the hearth. What you find is half-frozen, damp, and absolutely mocking you. The logs are reluctant to burn, but you collect them anyway, stacking them like chilled treasure and hauling them inside with the stiff gait of someone whose knees signed a resignation letter 3 days ago. Historians still argue whether Viking homes had dedicated firewood stores or whether people scavenged daily. Most agree it was a mix depending on the region and how well you'd planned your year. Which means you, as today's extremely average Viking, are probably making it up as you go. Again, back in the longhouse, someone is working leather. You can hear the scrape of a bone blade smoothing a hide, the rhythm both soothing and slightly ominous. Another person is braiding cords from spun wool. The repetition of handwork is everywhere. Weaving, knotting, stitching. The house is a hive of slow, productive movement. You try not to get roped into anything involving sharp tools. You're still recovering from the time you sewed your sleeve to the tablecloth. Lunch comes later, if it comes. Maybe a stew bubbling in an iron pot. A mix of dried fish, root vegetables, and whatever someone found in the storage pit that hadn't sprouted legs or teeth. Food preservation is half science, half luck. Smoking, drying, salting, and fermenting all play their part. And while it doesn't always taste good, it does keep you alive. Most of the time. one quirky detail. Some families stored butter in barrels buried underground, digging it up only on special occasions. And if that sounds odd, just wait until you taste it. Sharp, tangy, and slightly mossy. But hey, it spreads easily on rye flatbread and distracts from the fact that your toes haven't felt sensation since dawn. By early afternoon, the light fades again. The sun, exhausted by its 5-hour shift, begins to dip low. You step outside and squint at the faint golden glow hovering near the tree line. Snowflakes drift lazily, the kind that don't fall so much as hover with judgment. The sky turns that icy blue that makes you question every decision that led to this moment. You help mend a fence, your fingers stiff and uncooperative. The rope splinters, the wood creaks. Someone swears softly in Old Norse, possibly at the post, possibly at the cold, possibly at the gods. No one questions it. Cursing the weather is a communal sport. As evening approaches, the longhouse fills again. Everyone piles in, stomping snow from their boots, hanging cloaks on pegs, brushing frost from their beards or braids. The central fire is strong now, the room a little warmer, though smoke still hangs low in the rafters like a lazy spirit not yet ready to leave. Someone begins to tell a story, an old tale full of gods, giants, and the kind of dramatic gestures that require a clear fire pit and at least one unoccupied hand. You listen while chewing on a strip of dried fish that might also double as roofing material. The story winds on, full of thunder and cleverness, and the kind of poetic justice that only happens in legends. You lean back against a post, fur draped over your shoulders, the scent of smoke clinging to your skin. A dog settles beside you, warm and vaguely snoring. The room hums with soft chatter, firelight, and the slow comfort of shared hardship. And in this moment you begin to understand how they did it. Not through brute strength alone, or just piles of fur and gritted teeth, but through rhythm, community, humor that comes from knowing everyone else is cold too, and 1,000 quiet rituals that soften even the sharpest nights. Someone pokes the fire with a carved stick, decorated of course, because even Vikings like to doodle. Sparks flutter upward, dancing toward the smoke-stained beams overhead. It's evening now, the part of the day where you huddle together and pretend the cold outside isn't scheming. You sip from a wooden cup. The contents are lukewarm mead maybe, or broth, possibly just warm rainwater with ambition. It doesn't matter. It's liquid, and it didn't kill the last person who drank it, so you go for it. The warmth slides down your throat, spreading like a sleepy bear curling up in your chest. Around you, people settle into routines. Someone sharpens a knife by candlelight. Another adjusts a spinning wheel. Children chase each other between sleeping mats until a stern look from an elder slows their chaos to a whisper. You tuck your feet closer to the fire and wrap your cloak tighter. The wool smells faintly of goat and last week's stew, but it's familiar. Safe. The door opens briefly, letting in a gust of wind sharp enough to qualify as a weapon. A man enters, stomping snow from his boots and holding something wrapped in fur. A hare. Freshly caught. Dinner tomorrow. Maybe stew again. You try not to think about it too hard. Variety isn't the era's strong suit. Historically, Viking meals weren't elaborate, but they were efficient. Grains formed the base of most meals, with seasonal ingredients tossed in depending on luck, trade, or creative foraging. Some records even suggest soups thickened with ground tree bark. Yes, bark. Because when winter hits hard, everything's food if you believe in yourself. A woman ladles out more stew into shallow bowls, passing them around like blessings. Yours has a carrot in it. This is exciting. You make eye contact with the carrot for a long, meaningful moment before biting into it. It crunches slightly. It's perfect. Later, someone pulls out a lyre, crudely strung, a little out of tune, but somehow beautiful in the flickering firelight. They play a slow tune, fingers moving with practiced ease. The melody loops gently, like snowfall. Another person begins to sing, their voice low and steady, telling a story of Odin, of journeys, of ice and sea and stars. Historians still argue whether most Viking families sang nightly or only during special gatherings. But the evidence points to music being common, especially in long winters when stories and songs were the primary entertainment and emotional glue. These tunes weren't just to pass time. They were how memories stayed alive. And if you're not the musical type, you might be weaving, or whittling, or playing a game of Hnefatafl, the Viking board game that's a bit like chess and a bit like mild strategic chaos. You sit cross-legged with a neighbor and try to remember the rules. You don't. Neither does he. So you make them up together. At one point, the storyteller pauses. She describes a creature, half wolf, half shadow, that prowls the edges of the woods. It doesn't attack. It just watches, listens, waits. The children edge closer to their parents. You glance at the door, then at the fire, and smile. Good stories need a little chill. One quirky tradition from this era involves placing a carved token, usually wood or bone, under the sleeping mat for good dreams. You've been given one shaped like a bear's paw. It smells of pine resin and hope. You're told it belonged to someone who once wrestled a fox for a loaf of bread. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. As the music winds down, the longhouse dims. Lamps are snuffed. Coals banked carefully to last the night. People settle under furs and cloaks, finding corners, niches, favorite spots. You curl next to the hearth, your bear paw token tucked beneath your mat. The dog from earlier now wedged stubbornly against your back. The cold presses in at the edges of the house, like a curious animal. But the fire holds. The breath of everyone around you becomes a quiet rhythm. The air hums with warmth and stories and barley porridge digestion. And though your nose is still a bit chilly, and your toes may never forgive you, you feel, against all odds, cozy. Not modern cozy, not Netflix and socks cozy, but ancient, earned, shared with 50 people in a drafty room cozy. The kind that makes even the longest nights survivable. Outside, snow falls in silence. Inside, sleep begins. The dog sneezes and shifts beside you, pushing your arm into a wooden beam. Your eyes blink open just long enough to register the orange embers still glowing in the hearth. It's late. Very late. The kind of late that exists between time, when dreams bleed into reality and everything feels wrapped in wool. Someone nearby is snoring, softly. Someone else is mumbling in their sleep, something about fishing nets and mead. You sigh gently and roll onto your other side, only to meet the unrelenting crinkle of straw under your shoulder. It's not comfortable. It's not even technically acceptable by modern standards, but it's there, which, at this hour, is good enough. Eventually dawn creeps in, not with a bang, but a kind of silvery muttering through the chinks in the wooden walls. You crack open your eyes again and realize you're one of the last, still wrapped up. A few others are already stirring, tending the fire, stretching, pulling on wool tunics stiff from yesterday's snow. A pot hangs low over the rekindled flames, filled with something hot, bubbling, and beige. You sit up, you ache, you smell, you survive the night. Now comes the business of starting over. Outside, everything is blue and frozen. The sky's the kind of pale that makes you squint, and the wind's already gnawing on exposed fingers. You wrap a fur cloak around your shoulders and step out into the brittle air. Snow crunches underfoot. Somewhere in the distance, an axe strikes wood. Rhythmic, determined. Probably someone felling logs for firewood. Again, firewood is the true currency of winter here. Forget gold, forget silver. If you have dry kindling and a sharp blade, you're practically a king. Well, a smoky, soot-covered king with chapped hands. But still, one of the clan elders is sharpening a blade near the doorway, sitting on a stool fashioned from a tree stump. Wrapped in so many layers, they resemble a particularly anxious onion. They nod to you and mutter a weather prediction that involves birds, clouds, and whether the goats look nervous at sunrise. You thank them solemnly, as if that made sense. You take the path to the storage hut, just a low, timbered building packed with dried fish, smoked meat, root vegetables, and a suspiciously cheerful mouse population. You grab a turnip and a hunk of dried cod. Breakfast, Viking style. You gnaw quietly. It's salty. Very salty. Possibly immortal, a historical note. Preservation methods were more art than science. Smoking, salting, burying in snow. These were all viable options. None of them made the food tastier, just less lethal, mostly. Historians still argue whether people truly got used to the taste or simply stopped noticing. After breakfast, it's chore time. You help split logs, your arms vibrating with every strike. You shovel snow away from the livestock pen. You check on the sled, the one that barely works, but is still your only option for hauling heavy things across frozen terrain. It's a lot. But no one here gets out of chores. Not even the skalds. And speaking of skalds, today the storyteller is reciting a saga. It's the story of a warrior who built a sauna in the belly of a mountain and used steam to lure frost giants into a trap. You're 70% sure it's metaphorical. Or at least you hope it is. But it's entertaining. And you pause to listen while rubbing warmth back into your hands. Midday arrives without warning. Just a subtle shift in light, and the realization that your stomach is shouting louder than the village dogs. Lunch is barley porridge with dried berries if you're lucky. And hey, look at that. Today's lucky. The berries taste like sun and dust, but in a good way. A few of the younger kids chase each other with carved sticks, pretending to fight off sea monsters. You remember doing the same once. Only your monster was a very offended sheep. Someone nearby is sewing new mittens from fur scraps. Another is scraping ice off the roof with a shovel that's more splinters than tool. There's a strange peace to it all. Every person is doing something essential, even if it looks like chaos. Later in the afternoon, someone suggests a walk to the river, just to make sure it hasn't frozen over too thickly. You join them, because fresh air is better when shared, and you're hoping to spot the fox that's been stealing eggs. You don't find the fox. You do find the tracks. And you swear the tracks look smug. You return just before dusk, your nose red and your ears tired of existing. Dinner is a shared pot of stew again. Hearty, warm, and full of ingredients you decide not to question. Someone carves a rune into the doorway as protection against what they call snow spirits. Another knots dried herbs into the rafters, muttering something between a prayer and a recipe. You contribute by tightening the hide strips around the window. Everyone has their rituals. Everyone contributes to surviving the night. You settle by the fire again, pulling your cloak tight, sipping something that may be tea or maybe pine water. Doesn't matter. It's warm. And you're here. The longhouse glows gold and orange, its walls lined with sleeping bodies, snoring gently. The dog is already back, curled up by your knees, making it very clear you have no say in this arrangement. You take a deep breath, letting the scent of smoke, fur, pine, and cooked grain wrap around your senses. And even though the world outside is frozen solid, you feel the day's warmth settle into your bones. You've made it through another evening. Not because you're stronger or luckier, but because the house is full, the fire is fed, and the night is shared. The wind howls against the timbers tonight. Long, low, and weirdly personal, like it's trying to gossip through the walls. The rafters creak in response, and a dusting of frost drifts down from the thatch above. You blink and pull the fur higher over your chin. The dog sighs, offended by the draft, and tucks her nose under her paw. You're not asleep, not yet. But you're drifting, suspended in that warm middle ground where every sound blends into background, and even your thoughts feel padded in wool. Outside, the snow is piling up. It's that thick, silent kind of snow. The kind that mutes footsteps, dulls voices, and fills every dip and corner in the land. The kind of snow that swallows the world and leaves you with only the glow of your own fire. Inside, it's a symphony of quiet. A spoon clinks faintly in a wooden bowl. Someone stirs, then settles again. The coals crackle. A baby somewhere lets out a tiny sigh, more thought than cry. And then, stillness. But Viking winters weren't just about survival. They were about rhythm. You weren't just enduring cold. You were learning how to live around it, how to flow with it, how to respect it without surrendering. You start to see it not as a battle but a dance. And tonight, you're part of the choreography. Your fingers, half buried in furs, are still tingling from the cold, but they're warming. Slowly. Like the house itself. Cold bones. Warm heart. One of the elders begins humming. Just a thread of melody, something old and circular. No words. Just a tune that sounds like wool fields. Soft, frayed at the edges, and older than memory. You listen, half aware, letting it tug gently at the edges of your awareness. It's a lullaby for no one in particular. Or maybe everyone. Later, you catch sight of someone creeping toward the door, probably heading to relieve themselves outside. You wince in sympathy. Midnight snow is the universe's cruelest test of bladder strength. They tiptoe out like a guilty cat, cloak flapping behind them like a damp flag of resignation. And then, you're dozing again. There's no bedtime in a Viking winter, just a series of pauses between activity and sleep. You nap by the fire, then wake to stir the embers. You rest after a meal, then help mend boots. Sleep comes in chunks, in layers, like everything else, so even dreams feel layered here. Half myth, half memory. I know the dreams. They say people dream more vividly in the long winters. That the silence, the cold, the flickering light, all of it conspired to open doors in the mind. You don't know if that's true. But last night, you dreamed you were chasing a moose that quoted poetry and wouldn't stop stealing your mittens. So, maybe, you adjust your posture, pull the fur tighter, shift your weight to avoid that one annoying wrinkle in the straw. It doesn't help. The wrinkle is eternal, but you accept it. As you've accepted so many things this week, smoky porridge, wet boots, cursed goats, and a family member who keeps whistling while they chew. Someone sneezes, loudly. The dog growls in her sleep, probably assuming it's a threat. Someone else farts. You don't look. That's not your business. What happens in the longhouse stays in the longhouse. By now, the fire is mostly embers. The red glow flickers gently on the wooden beams, painting the shadows with little pulses of life. A few sparks drift upward. A sigh here, a cough there, and then nothing. You lie still and let your senses blend into the space around you. You don't belong here. Not really. Not by birth, or time, or culture. But tonight, you've eaten their bread, worn their wool, listened to their stories, and shared their silence. That counts for something. That's kinship, Viking style. You survived alongside them, not because of some heroic feat, but because you kept showing up. because you adapted, because you laughed at the cold and then lit another fire. Historians still argue whether the Norse mindset was fatalistic or optimistic, whether they feared their gods or simply respected them, whether winter was viewed as an enemy or just another season to outlast. The records vary, but the stories all agree on one thing. Community mattered, fire mattered, and a warm seat by the hearth was the truest treasure of all. So, now you curl up one last time. The fur warm, the straw almost bearable, the fire singing its last quiet lullaby. Your bones ache, but not in a bad way. More like they've remembered how to carry weight. Real weight. The kind that comes from living. The wind hums, the snow presses in, the night deepens. You are still. The fire dims, but never quite goes out. A soft red pulse beneath ash. It flickers like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, constant. Around it, the sleepers exhale together. A house full of quiet breath, warm in the middle of cold. Outside, the snow hushes every sound. No footfall, no crunch. Just stillness. The sort that drapes across a village like a thick wool blanket. You can almost hear the frost settling on rooftops, the moon painting a silver gloss on every branch. Inside, the dog sighs in her sleep. The cat, finally having forgiven the world, curls into a tight, purring spiral on someone's boots. A soft creak from the roof reminds you that time is still moving, but slowly, gently. There is no urgency here, only rhythm. Your body, heavy now, leans deeper into the fur. Every ache has softened, every sharp edge dulled by warmth, weariness, and time. You feel like snow on a roof, held in place, quiet, soft, and so you rest. In the long dark of the Norse winter, sleep is not an interruption. It is a ritual, a gift, a way of saying, I trust the world to wait for me. The wind outside lulls, the fire murmurs low, and your eyes close. The past never hurries. It waits patiently, so softly that we barely notice when we've moved into another tale. We head deep into the Roman frontier, not the sun-soaked plazas of Rome, but the icy, damp, utterly miserable edge of the known world, Roman Britain. Picture this. You've just been stationed at the farthest reach of the empire. Your boots squelch through freezing mud, your breath rises like steam in the air, and you can hear the hoot of some monstrous owl in the woods beyond. You're thousands of miles from home, and the locals aren't exactly sending welcome baskets. You, a Roman soldier, are about to find out what it really means to survive winter in ancient Britain. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. You march in with your unit during the early days of Roman conquest, somewhere around the mid-1st century CE. Britain isn't yet tamed. It's a wild, boggy, bitter land full of dripping trees, twitchy sheep, and people who paint themselves blue and scream before they attack. And here you are, wearing a standard-issue linen tunic and hobnailed sandals. Winter hits fast. You thought Gaul was bad? This is worse. There's no aqueduct here, no tiled bathhouse waiting, and certainly no hot wine mulled with cinnamon. Just you, your mates, and a hastily dug trench full of icy water. The first snow is almost romantic. It falls quietly at night, blanketing the dark hills in eerie white. But by morning, your tent ropes have frozen, and the guy next to you hasn't moved for hours. You nudge him with your foot. He grunts. Good. Still alive. You shiver, teeth chattering, and try to light a fire with what little you have. Damp twigs and a tiny bit of charcoal saved from yesterday's cookfire. Spoiler. It doesn't catch. It never catches. The wind howls through the gaps in your makeshift shelter, and the ground feels like it's trying to leach the life out of you, cell by frozen cell. One of the centurions tries to rally everyone with a rousing speech about discipline and glory, but it's hard to feel inspired when there's frost on your nose hairs. Even the standard bearer looks like he's about to cry. Someone jokes that they didn't sign up for this. They were promised Gaul, with its vineyards and semi-decent bread. The joke earns a few chuckles. Laughter is currency out here. Historians still argue whether Roman soldiers were fully equipped for Britain's brutal climate, or whether supply lines simply collapsed that far out. What we do know: you weren't given mittens. You improvised by wrapping your hands in spare cloth, maybe cutting up an old tunic. Someone once tried to use moss. It didn't go well. The mud is the worst part. Snow turns to slush. Slush turns to swamp, and everything sinks. Your feet are never dry. Ever. The constant wetness seeps into your bones. Trench foot? Oh, you invented it before it was cool. Socks are rumored, yes, called udones, but they're more often seen on officers or clever recruits who manage to trade for them. You? You dream of socks. Not wine, not women, not gold. Just warm, dry socks. As night falls, you prepare for sleep, or something resembling it. There's no bedroll, no straw mattress. You scrape out a patch of earth that's slightly less soggy and try to lie still. Your shield makes a half-decent windbreak, and your cloak, if you haven't sold it to a local for food, doubles as a blanket. You curl up like a question mark, trying to keep your toes from going numb. Quirky detail here. Some Roman soldiers believed rubbing goose fat on their feet would keep them warmer. You're not sure it works, but you do it anyway. Anything to keep sensation in your limbs. The smell, however, is less than divine. Eventually your body adjusts, sort of. The cold becomes less of a sensation and more of a condition, like being bald or left-handed. You exist with the cold now. It's always there. Part of you. You breathe shallow to keep your face from freezing, blink slowly, and drift into a half-sleep filled with dreams of hearth fires and olive trees. Suddenly, howling. Not wolves, though they do exist in the forests. This is a tribal war cry. You jolt upright, hand on gladius, heart racing. But it's a false alarm. Just another bored sentry messing around. He gets pelted with snowballs in the morning. Still, the night was long. Your knees ache from the cold. Your back is sore from the lumpy terrain. And your brain, well, it's halfway convinced that if you just close your eyes again, you'll wake up in Rome under warm sheets with fresh bread waiting. You won't, of course, but it's a nice thought. One soldier claims he saw a bear near the camp last night. Another swears a druid cursed him. You start to wonder if maybe the cold has cracked a few minds already. It's only December. You wake to the sound of something wet splattering onto your face. It's not an ambush. It's the tent leaking again. You blink, groggy, and realize the snow has melted just enough to slide in through the worn patch in the fabric above you. Everything is soggy. Your cloak is soggy. Your boots are soggy. Even your hair feels soggy. And you're pretty sure that's not supposed to happen. Today's mission: figuring out how to sleep tonight without becoming a human icicle. Because last night, that was brutal. You'd trade half your pay for a dry patch of hay and a little insulation. Turns out, Roman soldiers were resourceful, if not always successful. The military didn't hand out plush bedding, so you learn to scavenge. You and your fellow legionaries start collecting whatever you can find. Straw from the nearest village. Don't ask how it was obtained. Moss peeled from trees, scraps of wool, old sacks. Someone drags in a broken cartwheel and burns it for warmth. No one asks questions. You pile hay inside your tent. Thin and scratchy, but better than bare dirt. It helps insulate your body from the cold, sucking up from the earth. You take 2 cloaks and sandwich the hay between them, like a sad little mattress. Still smells like sheep. Still better than nothing. Historians still argue whether standard issue gear for sleeping existed at all for low-ranking Roman foot soldiers, or if most of what you slept on was sheer improvisation. Officers, of course, had it better. Cushioned pads, nice blankets, even servants to warm the tent beforehand. But you make do. Tonight, someone has the brilliant idea of digging shallow trenches under each tent to drain the melted snow. It mostly just becomes a new way to trap your ankle. But hey, effort counts. You learn fast that elevation is everything. A rock to the ribs is worth it if it means keeping your spine out of the puddle. One clever soul builds a crude platform out of scavenged timber and sets his bed above the wet ground. The rest of the cohort envies him with the intensity of starving wolves. He ends up charging people to nap on it during breaks. 3 minutes for a chunk of hard bread. That's how capitalism was born, probably. You try wrapping your legs in strips of leather from a ruined saddle to trap heat. One guy uses strips of rabbit fur tied with cord. Another lines his boots with sheep dung. He insists it works. You decide to just let him have that one. Quirky fact. Some soldiers would sleep with their heads wrapped in wool hoods or even helmet liners. Not just for warmth, but to block out the noise. Camps could be surprisingly loud, even at night. The wind, the snoring, the constant shifting of bodies trying to find 1 ounce of comfort. It's like a symphony of discomfort. Now, about the tents. Your unit sleeps in contubernia. Shared tents of 8 men. Not because you like each other, but because body heat is currency. You cram into a fabric shell, barely held together by years of mildew and military budget cuts. If one guy shifts, all 8 feel it. It's like sleeping in a burrito full of elbows and grudges. The tent itself, made from thick leather or heavy canvas, supported by short wooden poles and ropes staked into the ground. Not exactly windproof. It flaps like crazy in a storm. You find yourself whispering silent curses in Latin while trying to retie it for the 100th time. The cold slips in anyway. Sometimes you sleep in the open. If the march is too long or the terrain too rough to pitch camp, you just curl up in your cloak and hope no one steps on you. A Roman proverb surfaces in your mind. Fortune favors the bold. You suspect it's missing an addendum, but not the frostbitten. There's one night you remember vividly. The wind howls across the moors, carrying the scent of peat smoke and distant heather. You lie flat on a bed of moss and hay, cloak pulled over your nose, trying to keep your fingers from going numb. A fellow soldier mutters prayers to Mercury under his breath. Another just talks to his dead dog. No judgment. The cold does strange things. The scent of wet earth mixes with the tang of unwashed men and boiling lentils. The cook fire sputters outside, barely giving off any heat, but its glow flickers through the tent flap like a promise. You inch closer to the side nearest the fire pit, even though it means your hip touches someone else's. Personal space died weeks ago. Historians think that, when not on campaign, Roman forts may have offered wooden or stone sleeping quarters with raised platforms or straw-stuffed mattresses. But in the field, in a hastily constructed castra in some godforsaken British field, you got whatever nature and your own ingenuity could provide. Someone sneezes violently in the night, you all groan. If he's sick, you're next. The ancient world didn't believe in sick days. Some nights, when the wind is calm and the stars are out, the camp feels almost peaceful. The snow crunches quietly under boot steps. A fellow soldier hums a tune from back home. The firelight dances on the tent walls like ghostly figures reenacting battles of their own. You lie on your makeshift bed, wrapped in 3 layers of scavenged cloth and 1 shared blanket, and you think, maybe this isn't the worst place to be. But then a drop of water lands squarely on your forehead, right through that hole in the tent. Again, you wake in the middle of the night to the sound of teeth chattering. Only this time, it's not your own. Someone nearby is shivering so hard it's practically rhythmic. You peek out from under your damp, scratchy cloak and see the outline of a tent mate curled into a ball, wrapped in what looks like 3 cloaks and a saddlebag. You sigh. You've been there. In fact, you're still there. But tonight, you're trying something different. Desperation breeds innovation after all. And out here, with snow piling up and your eyebrows nearly frozen off, the Romans get creative. First lesson of survival: fire is your best friend. Unfortunately, it's also a flirt. Tempting, flickering, never quite committed. Getting a decent campfire going in soggy Britain is like trying to light a torch in a thunderstorm. You and your contubernum have tried every trick in the scroll. Dry bark tucked under your tunic during the march, powdered resin pinched from pine trees, even bits of old sandals, if they're dry enough to burn. Quirky fact: there are rumors that desperate legionaries sometimes use dried animal dung as fuel. You unfortunately can confirm this. It works, smells like betrayal, but it burns hot. Tonight, the fire is going. Barely. The camp is alive with the crackle of flames and the occasional joyful gasp when someone gets close enough to feel their fingers again. You rotate like a roasting chicken, soaking in every molecule of warmth. A few soldiers warm stones in the fire, then tuck them into their cloaks like prehistoric hot water bottles. You try it. It burns your wrist. Still, worth it. The other major trick: body heat. You and your 7 tent mates eventually realize that spooning isn't just for lovers, it's for survival. Someone jokes about how close everyone's getting. Someone else calls dibs on being Little Spoon. You all laugh, but no one moves away. You're warm, and that's all that matters. There's even a phrase some soldiers mutter: better warmth than pride. That, or the local Britons made it up to mock you. Either way, it's true. You remember one night vividly. The wind is shrieking outside like it's trying to peel the tents apart. The fire's gone out again, and everyone's too tired to fix it. So you huddle close, cloaks wrapped tight, and try to sleep in a chain of bundled up misery. Someone near the edge swears they feel snow landing on their face through the flap. You're pretty sure he's not wrong. Historians still argue whether legionaries were officially trained in cold weather survival, or whether they just learned on the job, with a steep learning curve and frostbite as the final exam. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Rome didn't build an empire by coddling its soldiers. When things get truly desperate, you share heat with animals. Not glamorous, but highly effective. A few pack mules are tethered close to the tents, and you accidentally set your sleeping space right next to one. Their thick bodies radiate heat. One even breathes warm air onto your back. You let it happen. It's the best night of sleep you've had in a week. There's a moment in the blackest hour before dawn when the wind dies and everything falls quiet. It's unsettling. You wake up half frozen, but suspiciously comfortable. Someone's leg is on top of you. Another guy is using your chest as a pillow, and your arm is numb under someone's shield. You blink at the frost-dusted ceiling of the tent and wonder, is this what camaraderie looks like? Cold, cramped, and weirdly tender? The next night, a group tries building a hypocaustum, a raised bed over a trench of hot coals, like a mini Roman floor heating system. They dig a pit, load it with embers, then place planks on top with blankets layered over. Ingenious. Also dangerous. Half the cohort gathers to watch. A few place bets on whether it'll work or combust. Miraculously, it works. Kind of. The planks smoke a little, but no one catches fire. The lucky 2 who sleep on it report it was like being hugged by Jupiter himself. You hate them, but you also admire them. So, some nights, the cold wins. No matter how close you huddle or how hot the fire burns, your fingers still go stiff. Your toes still throb with pins and needles. You fall asleep dreaming of Rome, of marble baths and thick wool blankets, only to wake up with snowflakes on your eyelids. Then come the odd little coping rituals. A soldier from Syria insists on singing ancient lullabies to chase away the chill. A Spaniard claims garlic under the tongue keeps your blood warm. One guy just aggressively rubs his legs every hour and mutters curses at the sky. You develop your own, rubbing your wrists, flexing your toes, counting backwards from 100 in Latin. You also talk. A lot. Night is when the soldiers start telling stories about battles fought, lovers left behind, ghosts seen in the woods. One tale sticks with you. A centurion swears he saw a glowing figure near the northern palisade, a Roman soldier dressed in armor centuries out of date, just staring into the forest. He vanished when I called out, the centurion said. Like smoke, everyone's quiet after that story. Suddenly the wind outside sounds less like weather, and more like something watching. You don't sleep well that night, but you do sleep a little warmer, pressed between two very cold, very snoring comrades, who now feel more like brothers than strangers. Not because you chose them, but because none of you chose the snow. The fourth night in a row of heavy snow turns everything into a silent graveyard of white. The tents look like lumpy frosted pastries, sagging under the weight. You're woken up by someone sneezing directly into your neck. And honestly, that's the least offensive thing that's happened so far this week. Today, your orders are simple. Stay alert, stay warm, and for the love of Jupiter, try not to die in your sleep. Not exactly poetry, but that's the Roman army for you. Still, something different is in the air. There's word of a possible skirmish with local tribes near the ridge, which means tonight, you won't be sleeping like a shivering sandwich of humans. You'll be pulling partial night watch, armed, armored, and very awake. Sleeping in armor is the kind of experience that makes you question your life choices. It's not just uncomfortable, it's ridiculous. Your lorica segmentata, that iconic banded metal chest plate, is heavy, loud, and basically a medieval microwave when it comes to body heat. But in the cold, it turns into a chest freezer. Every plate seems to absorb the chill, like a perfectly sculpted ice pack hugging your ribs. You lie back in your ditch, dug hastily behind a rise in the ground, and try to find a position where the helmet doesn't dig into your skull. There isn't one. Your gladius lies across your chest, your javelin within reach. You're supposed to be sleeping light, ready to spring into action if needed. In reality, you drift in and out of something that isn't quite sleep, but isn't fully conscious either. Like a soldier's version of airplane mode, historians still argue whether full gear was always worn at night during campaigns. Some sources suggest only partial kit, cloak and sword, while others argue full armor was expected whenever attack was likely. Based on your current suffering, you sincerely hope future generations vote for the partial kit theory. Your back is wet, again. Even with the shield beneath you and the extra tunic folded as a pillow, the ground is like sleeping on a frozen sponge. You can feel every contour of the earth through the thin padding. Someone whispers that he can't feel his toes. You respond with a whispered, luxury, and get a soft snort in reply. The truth is, no one sleeps well during high alert. Every crack of a branch or distant howl makes your body jolt. One guy punches himself awake during a dream. Another tries to sleep sitting up, back against a log, like some grizzled statue of Roman frustration. At least it keeps your lower back from freezing. You watch the sky for a while. The clouds part just enough to reveal a slice of moon. It lights the landscape in a cold blue glow. Everything silver, like a dream that hasn't warmed up yet. You imagine what this place will look like in 100 years. Will Roman roads still cut through these hills? Will forts still stand? Or will the snow bury it all? Your thoughts drift to the people you're supposedly conquering. The Britons. You've fought them. You've seen their villages. Round houses with thatched roofs and smoky fires. You've seen their dead. But now, lying here in a freezing ditch, you wonder how they sleep through this cold. Maybe better. Maybe they know some secret, some druidic ritual involving deer pelts and warm rocks. Or maybe they're just tougher than you. One soldier tells a story about sleeping standing up. Swears he did it once during the Germanic campaign. Everyone laughs quietly. Another guy claims he once fell asleep walking. That one's not as funny, because you've almost done that too. You remember the time your unit bivouacked near Hadrian's Wall, still half built. There were stone blocks everywhere. And for once, there was actual shelter. You slept inside what would one day be a storeroom. The wind couldn't get in. The fire burned steady. That night you dreamed of home, of warm bread, of your mother's voice, of not having to wear every article of clothing you own just to fall asleep. Tonight, though, it's different. The ditch isn't warm, the ground isn't dry, but you're getting used to it. Your body has adapted. Your mind too. You've learned to sleep with one eye open and one hand gripping cold steel. You no longer jump at every sound. You listen to them. You catalogue them. Rabbit, wind, owl, soldier crying quietly. All part of the normal nightscape now. There's a quirky tradition one soldier starts, drawing smiley faces in the frost on his shield each night. He says it keeps the spirits away. Another guy starts sleeping with a tiny carved figurine of Hercules under his tunic. You don't ask why. You just nod. Like it all makes perfect sense. You've heard talk that when stationed in more permanent forts, soldiers get actual wooden bunks with straw bedding. The thought is like a warm fire in your chest. You begin to imagine what that life must be like. No digging, no frostbitten elbows, no mystery puddles forming under your blanket. Just a roof, a wall, and something not made of snow under your spine. But that's not tonight. Tonight, you adjust your helmet, tuck your chin down, and let the freezing air sting your cheeks. A fox yelps in the distance. Someone shifts nearby. The world outside is silent and still, except for the slow rise and fall of your breath, fogging up into tiny clouds that vanish in the moonlight. You close your eyes again. You don't expect to sleep, but you do. If only for 10 minutes at a time. And honestly, that's enough. You're reassigned. After months in the field, mud, frost, trench naps, the occasional heated rock, you're finally being sent to a castrum, a permanent Roman fort near the frontier, with stone walls, timber towers, and the promise, oh gods, the promise of a roof. The march there is pure slush. Melting snow soaks your calves, and you've officially decided your boots have reached a state of permanent dampness. But morale is high. Everyone's buzzing with the hope of dry bedding, cooked meals, and maybe, if fortune is smiling, a night where no one has to share body heat with the guy who never learned personal hygiene. You arrive at dusk. The fort rises out of the mist like a dream cast in stone. Fires flicker behind arrow slits. You can smell roasted barley and... Wait. Is that pork fat? Inside the gates, it's warm by comparison. Wind breaks, dry ground, organized streets. You're shown to your barracks, a long, narrow room shared with your squad. But this time, it has actual walls. No flapping leather, no rope that snaps in the wind, just stone and timber. You don't even care that the ceiling leaks a little when it rains. You're indoors. You inspect your assigned cubicular, your sleeping space. It's no palace, but you've been dreaming of this. A wooden bunk bed with straw-stuffed mattresses, rough wool blankets, even a little shelf for your gear. You sit down, and the straw rustles like music. A mouse darts out and vanishes under the wall. You salute it. It was here first. That night, no one talks about sleeping in a ditch. You all pretend like you were born to this relative luxury. You try not to tear up when you tuck your cloak under your head and your feet are not submerged in cold earth. But you don't sleep yet. Not quite. Someone builds a fire in the hearth, and everyone slowly drifts toward it like moths to a flame. And then, the ghost stories start. The local auxiliaries, recruits from native tribes allied with Rome, begin whispering in low voices. Stories about the Moors, about shadowy figures in the woods, about soldiers who vanish in the snow, only to return months later, still wearing armor, but with empty eyes and frost-black fingers. You roll your eyes at first. Then you remember the night in the field, when the wind sounded different. One soldier swears he saw a pale figure walking along the parapet last week. Another tells the tale of a Roman officer who mocked the old gods of Britain and was found days later, barefoot and frozen, clutching a wooden idol. Everyone goes quiet after that one. The fire crackles. Someone stokes it with a poker like he's afraid it'll go out and take the warmth and safety with it. You climb into your bunk eventually. It's high up, but the air is still warmer than any night you spent outside. The mattress smells like straw and dust, and something vaguely horse-like, but you don't care. You wrap yourself in the blanket. You pull your cloak over your shoulders. You listen to the low murmurs of other soldiers easing into sleep, and for once, your shoulders begin to relax. Historians still argue whether Roman forts were truly comfortable or merely less terrible. The evidence suggests varied conditions depending on the region, supplies, and rank. But to you, this bunk might as well be a featherbed in a senator's villa. You fall asleep to the sound of someone softly singing a lullaby in a language you don't know. You imagine the snow falling outside, silent and slow, blanketing the fort in peace. There's a warm stone hearth nearby, embers still glowing. The room creaks occasionally, but it's safe, solid. You dream of warmer lands, of tiled floors and fresh olives. But then you dream of Britain too. The fog, the snow, the barracks lit with firelight. You dream of the field camps, the mud, the stink of your comrades, the weird affection forged in shared suffering. And strangely, you feel something like nostalgia, quirky tidbit. Some Roman forts had official mascots, cats, dogs, even goats. You spot a scruffy black cat in the corner of the barracks. It blinks slowly, then curls up beside the hearth. Lucky thing. Before the final drop into sleep, you take a moment to breathe. In, out. The straw creaks. The fire hisses. Your toes, for once, aren't numb. And no one snoring directly into your ear. This is peace. This is, tomorrow might bring battle, or drills, or a frozen latrine. But right now, you're warm, horizontal and indoors, and that, by Roman military standards, is the definition of paradise. Now that the firewood is stacked and the frost is creeping in, let's turn toward a different kind of quiet. We trudge through the snow-draped silence of a pine-stiffened forest, where the air bites your nose and your boots crunch over frostbitten roots. You're surrounded by a world that never seems to thaw. The sky glows with that eerie northern twilight. Not quite day, never really night, and the wind seems to whisper in a language older than any you've ever heard. You're cold already, and we haven't even stepped inside yet. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive this without at least 3 layers of fur and a strong disregard for comfort. You step into the world of the early Norse settlers, a land stitched together with wind, snow, and bark. There are no houses like yours here. No drywall, no insulation foam, no heating that hums at the flip of a switch. Just timber. Lots of timber. Rough-hewn logs notched and stacked, forming a skeletal box of survival in the great, damp nowhere. It starts simple. Early Norse homes are barely more than long wooden halls, single-room shelters nestled close to forests and fjords. The timber is local and plentiful, but the gaps between the logs, wide enough to let in gossip from the gods, and much, much colder than you'd prefer. The Norse don't yet have glass windows, no chimney flues either. Instead, smoke from the hearth curls upward to find whatever gap it can in the roof. The walls? Drafty. The floors? Dirt. The scent? A bouquet of wood smoke, wet fur, and something vaguely fermented. But it's better than the snowstorm raging outside. Mainstream historians tell us these first homes were built with practical elegance. Sturdy posts, bark cladding, and steep roofs to shed snow like a wet dog. But historians still argue whether the original Norse longhouse was copied from earlier Germanic tribes or uniquely Scandinavian in its design. Either way, it wasn't winning any awards for coziness. And then there's the wind. You hear it now, whistling through the cracks in the walls like a tired ghost. You pull your cloak tighter, but still, the cold slithers in. The walls need something. Something soft, something fibrous. Something ooey, mossy. But you're not there yet. Not quite. First, there are other attempts. Bundles of straw, slatherings of mud, even old clothes shoved in the gaps. One village tried sheep's wool once. The sheep weren't thrilled. There's a wonderful little-known detail here. Early Norse children were sometimes tasked with poking bits of animal hair or feathers between the logs. It worked until a particularly windy night turned the house into a snow globe of goose fluff. You can imagine the father muttering into his beard, the mother scraping feathers off the stew pot, the child avoiding eye contact. So the hunt begins for something better, something easy to collect, lightweight, and ideally not alive. You step back outside, squinting at the forest floor. It's soggy, spongy. And just beneath the trees, blanketing stones and creeping up roots, is the answer. Moss. At first glance, moss seems laughably fragile. But touch it. It's dense, springy, almost wool-like when dried. It doesn't rot easily. It smells like the forest. Best of all, it grows everywhere. That bright green patch on the rock, insulation. That scraggly bit between two tree stumps, future draft blocker. Some families started gathering it during warmer months, storing it in bundles by the hearth to dry out. Moss picking became a summer ritual, not unlike berry gathering, though far less delicious. There's even speculation, though fringe, that certain Norse dialects developed separate words for different grades of moss. High praise for plant carpet, but here's where it gets more tactile. Picture yourself squatting beside a wall, your numb fingers cramming dried moss into a crevice between two uneven logs. It's oddly satisfying. The green cushions into place, puffing up slightly before compressing like memory foam from a more herbal world. Still, not all moss is equal. Some species invite bugs, others reek when damp, and one rather unfortunate variety, Sphagnum palustre, has the charming habit of growing mold if left unchecked. One homeowner learned that the smelly way. At night, you sleep inches from this moss-packed wall, hoping it holds back the wind, the wet, and whatever spirits are wandering around out there. A small oil lamp flickers beside you. The moss glows faintly green. You hear it creak slightly when the wood settles, like the house is whispering back. And while it's doing its insulation job, moss is also hiding little secrets. Tiny beetles, lost bits of bone needles, even once, according to one saga fragment, a misplaced silver coin. That one sparked an entire family feud, but that's another tale. The point is, Moss isn't just filler. It's function wrapped in folklore. And over time, people began to respect its odd utility. Some even believed it had spiritual properties, protection against frost demons, or a symbol of persistence in harsh lands. So here you are, standing in a drafty home, half the walls stuffed with greenery, your clothes smoky, your boots soggy, and yet you're warm. Warmer than expected. And that's no small win in a land where winter comes early, leaves late, and bites hard. Now the next morning greets you with a face full of chill. You duck your head out of the door, really more of a wooden flap, and your breath fogs instantly. There's hoarfrost on everything, including your eyelashes. You shake it off, stamp your feet, and trudge over to the side of the house. That moss? Still there. Still snug between the logs like nature's caulking. You give it a gentle poke. Springy, dry. Smells like pine and secrets. You spend the day walking between homes, each one a little different in how it handles the cold. One neighbor, more ambitious than wise, tried sealing his walls with seaweed last year. Now his house smells like a fish market in July. Another swears by goat hair, but the goats have been giving him side-eye ever since, and yet, home after home, the moss keeps showing up. It's gathered in burlap sacks, hung in rafters to dry, packed into wall gaps like a strange leafy puzzle. But how did the moss become the go-to insulation? Well, besides being free and abundant, moss had some weirdly perfect properties for the job. It resists mold better than straw. It holds warmth, but doesn't ignite easily. It even wicks moisture a little, breathing just enough to keep the walls from rotting outright. Plus, there's something deeply comforting about it. You press your palm to the wall. It doesn't feel warm exactly, but it's not icy. It's as if the forest has wrapped its arms around the house, soft, silent, and slightly damp. One thing they don't tell you in most history books. Moss was also a favored stuffing for shoes. Vikings sometimes packed dried moss into their boots like primitive Dr. Scholl's inserts. Comfy, if a little squishy. But hey, when you're trudging through snow for 9 months a year, squishy is good. There's even a fringe theory, historians scoff, of course, that some early Norse communities created ritual moss bundles hung above the door for good luck. Supposedly, if the moss dried too fast or turned black, it was a bad omen. Possibly just a sign of a leaky roof, but superstition has a flair for drama. You stop at one longhouse where someone's testing a new idea. Moss mixed with animal fat. The theory? It'll seal better and repel bugs. The result? Well, it does smell vaguely of bacon, but in the least appetizing way possible. No one talks about that experiment anymore. Still, people keep innovating. In one village, the locals mix moss with clay to form a primitive chinking paste. Mud-stuffed moss ropes that harden like a crust between the logs. It's messy. It flakes. But it works. Sort of. The real trick is keeping it from crumbling during spring thaws. One poor soul leaned against a wall mid-April and fell right into his own pantry. And moss isn't just a winter thing. During warmer months, moss becomes a handy filter. People wedge it into water jugs to strain debris, line food pits to keep moisture down, and, in some households, use it as a kind of reusable napkin. Let's not dwell on that last one too long. But here's a fun, slightly itchy twist. Before moss became a wall stuffer, it may have been a people stuffer. That's right. Some early Norse folk used moss as toilet paper. Soft, absorbent, slightly antiseptic. Honestly, not a bad option, considering what else was lying around. You do not want to know what the backup plan was. Hint, pine cones, and still, you return to the walls. Those moss-stuffed seams become part of the home's personality. You can spot a meticulous housekeeper by the evenness of their moss lines. Neat, symmetrical rows. Green in summer, brown by winter. Kids would sometimes carve initials into them with sticks. Husbands would grumble when wives asked them to repack the moss after every big storm. There's a cozy domesticity to it, a quiet ritual. After a hard day hauling fish or chopping firewood, you come home, brush snow from your shoulders, and maybe tuck a fresh pinch of moss into a drafty corner, like tucking in a blanket. And if you're lucky, that moss isn't hiding anything alarming. Every so often, a mouse decides to nest in the walls. You hear them at night, scratching softly, as if trying to rewrite the sagas in tiny claw strokes. One old tale tells of a man who swore his house whispered prophecies to him at night. Turns out, squirrels. Still, those moss-packed gaps are better than open ones. Cold is the true enemy here. Not trolls, not raids, not taxes, though those came later. And every shred of insulation mattered. Without moss, your toes go black. Your stew turns to slush. Your thoughts get slow and slushy too. Historians still argue whether moss use was born out of true innovation or just desperate trial and error. Did one genius notice it in the woods and think, huh? Or did everyone just kind of agree on it at once? The records are quiet. Moss doesn't leave much in the archaeological record. It just fades away. Like warmth, like memory. But if you listen closely tonight, you can hear it in the wind. The soft hush of forest breath pressed into the walls of homes long gone. Still there, in a way. Still warming some long-forgotten dreamer. Still trying to hold back the cold. You wake up coughing. Not from illness, just from smoke. It floats like a lazy ghost through the longhouse, drifting upward, seeking non-existent chimneys and barely finding the smoke hole someone thought to cut in the roof. You wave a hand in front of your face, but it's mostly symbolic. The air is thick and warm, but not in a cozy way. More like living inside a chimney. Welcome to Norse interior design. Inside, the fire crackles in a stone-lined pit sunk into the earthen floor. A big iron pot hangs over it, bubbling something unidentifiable. Cabbage? Fish? Maybe both. You don't ask. The walls, lined with moss, catch the flicker of flames, and you can't help but notice. They're getting a little dark around the edges. That's the thing about moss. It's good at warmth. Not so great at staying clean. Over time, the constant smoke from the fire blackens everything. The rafters are streaked with soot. The moss between the walls darkens like an old sponge. You touch it, and your fingers come away smudged. There's a perpetual aroma of stew meats, smolder meets wet socks. You try not to breathe too deeply, yet this was normal. This was home. It's easy to forget, in your temperature-controlled life, how many centuries people lived in what was basically a smokehouse with beds. One modern archaeologist even noted that the average Norse household may have inhaled enough smoke daily to turn their lungs into charcoal briquettes. Though we're paraphrasing, still, you learn to live with it. You duck your head when passing under the rafters. You squint through the haze, and you learn that moss, over time, becomes a kind of sponge, not just for air, but for odor. It absorbs everything. The smell of smoke, the stew, the sweat. Occasionally the chamber pot. That moss wall. It's not just insulation. It's a scented timeline. A scratch and sniff record of every bad dinner and overcooked herring. And yet, somehow, it's still better than the alternatives. You visit another longhouse where the owners decided to forego moss in favor of dung. Yes, dried animal dung. They claim it's warm, packed tight, and even keeps away the evil spirits. But mostly, It just keeps away guests. There's something uniquely humbling about standing in someone's home and realizing the walls are literally made of poop. And when the fire gets too hot? Let's just say you won't mistake the smell. In contrast, moss starts looking downright luxurious. You find yourself back in your own corner of the longhouse, where the moss hasn't yet turned to soot mud. You kneel to inspect it and discover something odd. Tiny flecks of bone. Maybe from a sewing needle or a fish hook. Nobody knows. But it's a reminder that these homes weren't just places to sleep. They were workshops, kitchens, cradles, tombs sometimes. Life happened here, loud and smoky and relentless. There's a story passed down in one village of a woman who gave birth during a blizzard, with only moss to catch the afterbirth and muffle the infant's first cries. The baby lived, the moss got burned, but the story stuck, and it's not all misery. There's laughter here too. You hear it, faintly, through the smoke, a child giggling as they play with a wooden toy, a man muttering in frustration as his boot gets stuck to the sticky moss clay mix near the hearth. Someone drops a ladle, someone curses, someone sings, off-key and far too loud. These moments live in the walls. The moss, darkened though it is, seems to hold the memory of them. Even still, some households took it a step further and began lining the inside of the walls with decorative hangings, woven wool or linen, to hide the stained moss. Functional and fashionable. One fringe theory says these tapestries acted as early fire barriers, though historians still argue whether they helped or just caught fire first. Regardless, you start noticing little ways the moss evolved. Some families stitched herbs into it, thyme, juniper, even dried mint, hoping to mask the smell. You lean close to a wall and inhale. For half a second, it smells like a forest spa. Then the stew takes over again. You also notice a strange custom among elders, pressing their palms against the moss as they speak, as if drawing warmth from memory itself. One old man tells you that moss keeps secrets, that every home has a voice, and it speaks through the seams. You smile politely. But when you lie down that night, head resting near the wall, you swear you hear it too. A soft crackle, a whisper, like wind in leaves. The ghost of something green, still breathing beneath the soot. Outside, the wind howls. The snow taps gently against the roof. Inside, the moss holds fast, damp in places, crumbling in others, but still doing its job. It's not perfect, but it's what they had. And somehow it worked. As you drift off, you imagine the countless fires this moss has seen, the babies it's kept warm, the storms it's endured, the quiet it has listened to. You roll onto your side. The moss crackles faintly beside your ear, and just before sleep takes you, you think, this house may be smoky, smelly, and slightly alive, but it's also safe and warm. By now, you've developed a strange fondness for the moss. You no longer see it as just green stuffing or a weird forest sponge. It's part of the family. You can't imagine the walls without it, though apparently, not everyone shares your new appreciation. One morning, you're invited to help a neighbor patch up a sagging section of wall. You expect the usual quiet repairs, but when you arrive, the whole household is involved. There's a woman squatting beside a basket of dried moss, sorting it like a jeweler inspects gemstones. Her teenage son hands her handfuls, only to be scolded. Not that one. That one smells like goat. You join in, kneeling by the wall, gently pushing dry moss into the gaps with a stick. It's not hard work, but it's oddly absorbing. Each log is a little crooked, each crevice a slightly different shape, and you start to understand why they call it the quiet task. It's meditative, this careful pushing and patting, packing and smoothing. like knitting with the forest. The woman tells you she's done this every autumn since she was 12. She calls it veg filling, wall filling, and swears it keeps not just the cold, but the bad dreams out. You nod. You're not sure you believe her, but something about her calm certainty makes you want to believe. As you work, you overhear scraps of conversation. What the sheep are doing wrong this week. Whose cousin married a man who claimed his moss could sing. And the ongoing local debate about whether blue moss is luckier than green. The answer apparently depends on whom you ask, and whether your roof leaks. Historians still argue whether mossing walls was a primarily male or female task. Some say it was communal, everyone helped. Others claim it was women's work, tied closely to domestic ritual. There's a compelling theory that moss stuffing had ceremonial meaning too, especially during childbirth or mourning. It was about protection, not just from cold, but from the unknown. Fringe researchers have pointed to Old Norse poems that describe hands green with homekeeping. One particularly odd saga mentions a woman who cursed her neighbor by stealing the moss from her wall, believing it would leach the warmth from her bones. Whether poetic or paranoid, moss clearly had meaning, and the meaning deepened with time. Some households began pressing charms into the wall gaps. Small runes, carved bone talismans, bits of red thread, all tucked discreetly into the moss. You reach to tuck in a handful and feel something small and hard. A bone button? Maybe. Maybe something older. You leave it alone. That evening, someone brings out the ale. The repairs are done. The wall looks tighter than ever, and the air inside is noticeably less sharp. You sip from a horn cup and listen to tales passed down with the mead. One man tells of a cousin who built a wall using nothing but moss and fish scales. It fell down, of course, but he swore it smelled amazing. Laughter crackles like kindling. Later, as the fire dies and people drift off, you remain, eyes half closed, staring at the patched wall. You see it differently now. Not just a structure, but story. Each moss clump is a sentence, each log a paragraph, and the whole thing, a memory, told in texture and time. You lie back on your mat and feel a small draft where your corner of the house hasn't yet been restuffed. It tickles your neck. You pull your cloak tighter, make a mental note to fix it tomorrow, and try not to think about the family of spiders who probably live there. Another curious fact comes to mind as you drift. Some longhouses built nearer the coast began experimenting with sea moss. Slimier, darker, but strangely effective when dried. One saga fragment even credits a man's survival during a winter siege to his moss-packed walls and his miserly appetite. A backhanded compliment, but hey, he lived. You begin to notice just how layered the moss work is. It's not one and done. It takes maintenance, like brushing your teeth, but with walls. Families regularly check for rot, dampness, or shifting logs. If water gets in, mold city. If bugs settle in, time to start over. That's the thing no one tells you. Keeping a house warm in the Norse world is a battle of patience, not brute strength. The enemy isn't dramatic. It's creeping damp, biting wind, slow decay. And moss, humble as it is, fights back. You remember what the woman said earlier. It keeps the bad dreams out. Maybe she meant spirits. Maybe just the kind of dreams that come when your toes freeze off. Either way, you sleep easier that night. Not far from you, another family is starting their repairs. A child sits cross-legged beside a moss pile, fluffing it out like cotton. He sings to himself, something repetitive and tuneless, and you wonder how many generations have sung to the moss like that. How many winters have been softened by this green, springy miracle pulled straight from the earth, and still you hear the wind outside. It hasn't gone away. It never really does. But inside, it's just you, the fading fire, and the moss, still doing its job, still keeping watch. Morning arrives without ceremony. The fire's gone to embers, and the cold slips under the door like a nosy cat. You stretch, yawn, and reach toward the nearest wall. It's not warm, but it's not freezing either. And somehow, that's enough. Outside, the wind's picked up again. You hear it flapping someone's cloak and scattering loose snow across the roof. You step out for a moment, breath puffing like steam. Around you, the village is stirring. One house has smoke pouring from its roof hole. Another has someone up on a ladder, pressing new moss into the eaves like stuffing a giant's pillow. But something's changing. A few of the newer homes don't use moss at all. Instead, their walls are daubed with a mix of mud and straw, wattle and daub, imported from further south. It holds heat, they say. Resists wind better. But it lacks charm. It cracks. It flakes. And it smells like someone tried to make soup out of dirt. Still, change has arrived, creeping in like moss once did. Quiet, persistent, inevitable. You visit one of these newer homes, curious. Inside, the air is cleaner. Less smoke, fewer drafty corners, and no moss stains on the walls. But also no softness. The walls are rigid. The sound bounces differently. Your footsteps echo where once they were cushioned. You run your hand along the hard-packed wall and feel no give. It's solid, sure, but cold in its own way. There's a reason old-timers still look at these new walls with a bit of suspicion, like they're missing something. Later you overhear a few elders grumbling by the fire. Stone walls don't breathe. Moss knows the wind. They sip their ale and nod, as if agreeing on an ancient truth. One that can't be troweled on or shipped in from across the sea. Historians still argue whether the decline of moss use was due to technological progress or simply the need to standardize construction. Some claim the newer methods truly were better, cleaner, sturdier, easier to teach. Others insist something essential was lost, not just in comfort, but in connection. The old homes were more than shelter. They were living things, warm-blooded, breathing, listening. There's one man, half a historian, half a poet, who says moss was the lungs of the longhouse. A beautiful idea, even if not exactly scientific. But you get what he means. You felt it. That soft barrier, grown from the same earth you walk on, shaped by your own hands, holding the storm at bay. Now, though, the trend moves forward. Some houses are built with imported stone, others with turf, stacked layers of soil and grass, cut from the ground like sod bricks. Turf is excellent insulation, but let's be honest, it's still just cold dirt, organized. A few stubborn families cling to moss, not out of nostalgia, but practicality. They know it works. They trust it. And besides, it's easier to fix than stone when your cousin's ox accidentally knocks a hole through the back wall, which apparently happens more than you'd think. Even so, the moss era is ending. Children grow up without learning which moss is best. Fewer people know how to dry it properly or store it through winter. Those old rituals, sorting, singing, stuffing, fade into bedtime stories. One grandmother still teaches her grandkids the difference between pine moss and peat moss, but they mostly just nod and return to their carved bone game pieces. The moss is disappearing. Not all at once, but steadily. Still, you can't help but smile when you pass a certain house on your walk home. A crooked old longhouse, leaning slightly to the left, patched with so many different kinds of moss. It looks like a quilt. Smoke curls gently from its roof. Inside, someone hums. And you just know the walls are still whispering. You press your hand against your own wall one last time. It's rough, smudged, slightly fragrant, alive. And as the snow begins to fall, soft and slow and silent, you know something ancient is still holding you close. While the snow falls gently on that village roof, elsewhere, something equally quiet is unfolding. We head back to a windswept winter in medieval Iceland, where the landscape is mostly lava, the sheep are louder than your neighbors, and the wind could probably peel your face off. You'll be stepping into the wool-wrapped shoes of a farm wife, just trying to survive one icy day without freezing solid or falling headfirst into the dung pile. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. It's still dark. Of course it is. The sun doesn't rise until mid-morning this time of year, and even then it's more of a dim shrug than an actual sunrise. You lie under a heap of heavy woolen blankets stuffed with moss and feathers, your nose the only part of you exposed to the bitter air leaking through the turf walls. It's frozen. Not metaphorically. Your nose is literally stiff with frost. You groan softly, but there's no use complaining. The sheep are already bleating from the byre. One of them is probably stuck in something again. You push back the bedding and wince as your feet hit the stone floor. Your first real chore of the day is simply standing up. You stumble toward the hearth, where yesterday's embers have just barely clung to life. You breathe on them, feed them a scrap of dried moss, and whisper to the gods of fire under your breath. It crackles. Good sign. Next, you reach for the water pail. Solid ice. Of course it is. You grab the little iron pick and start chipping, trying not to slice your fingers open. Every minute you spend here is a minute the animals are hungry and annoyed and very vocal about it. You throw on a rough homespun tunic and your thickest cloak. Not because it's flattering. It smells like wet goat. But because the wind outside is going to slap you with a force that might genuinely rearrange your skeleton. You yank open the heavy wooden door and step out into the dark. Your boots crunch through snow crusted with ice, and the wind immediately takes a bite out of your cheek. You squint toward the animal pen, where the sheep are shifting and stamping. Your breath curls in front of you like ghost smoke, and you mutter a sleepy curse under it. Not your best morning. The pen gate is half frozen shut. You put your whole shoulder into it and nearly fall when it gives way. Inside, the sheep jostle around your legs, muttering their woolly complaints. You reach for the hay bundle you dragged in yesterday, scattering it into the trough with numb hands. Historians still argue whether Icelandic turf farms had separate animal shelters, or if the sheep often shared space with the humans during deep winter. Either way, it's crowded, it stinks, and the animals are not grateful. One gives you a sideways headbutt that nearly topples you. You're too tired to be offended. Next up, water. You haul the smaller pail to the nearest spring-fed trough, crack through the crust of ice with a stick, and scoop as much as you can. Your knuckles are burning from the cold. This would be a great time to discover the ancient Icelandic secret to keeping hands warm. Sadly, there isn't one. You just suffer. Back in the house, the smoky air from the rekindled fire stings your eyes. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that lets the smoke drift out whenever the wind isn't busy, shoving it back inside. You wipe your eyes with your sleeve, check that the children are still cocooned in their blanket nests, and start preparing a meager breakfast. The pot from last night's porridge still has some hardened oats in the bottom. You scrape it, add water, and set it by the fire to boil. For a treat, you crumble in a pinch of dried angelica root. It's bitter, but it might trick your tongue into thinking it's flavor. While the pot heats, you shuffle over to the small shelf where your weaving tools are stored. You run your fingers over the carved bone spindle. Not yet. First, the animals. All of them. The cow is next. She's a shaggy thing, with giant eyes and an expression that says, "I'm judging your life choices." You carry a torch out to the side shelter where she's stalled. She's been in there all night, snorting steam into the rafters and stepping in her own frozen manure. The smell could probably strip paint off a longship. You give her a handful of dried fodder then break the ice on her water bucket. Again. Then, a quick health check. No wounds, no signs of bloat, no frostbite on the udder. You note it all with the practiced eye of someone who cannot afford to lose a single animal this season. You head back in with stiff fingers and a puff of smoke clinging to your hair. Breakfast is lukewarm, but at least it's something. You ladle out small portions into clay bowls, nudge the kids awake, and take your own place near the fire, where a single spark drifts lazily toward the rafters. You swat it before it catches the thatch. Again. Fringe historians have speculated that Icelandic women sometimes kept small herbal sachets tucked into their bodices to mask body odor during winter. You consider the idea and sniff your sleeve. Probably wouldn't help. You smell like wet wool, old smoke, and cow breath. Charming. As you slurp your gritty porridge, you think about what still lies ahead. Spinning, milking, mending, chopping, hauling. Maybe a surprise visit from the neighbor who won't stop talking about her son's excellent teeth. It's going to be a long day, and the sun hasn't even risen yet. The sun finally drags itself over the horizon, but it's not exactly doing you any favors. It casts a weak orange glow across the snowdrifts, barely warming the air, and definitely not warming your fingers. Still, it's light enough to spin by now. You shuffle over to your stool near the hearth, dragging a basket of wool behind you. Clumps of greasy fleece still smelling faintly of sheep. You settle in with a resigned sigh, reaching for the wool carders, those vicious little brushes that look like torture devices but are just there to straighten the fibers. You start combing. The motion is familiar, rhythmic. Your shoulders relax a bit, your breath evens out. The fire crackles softly. Even the wind outside seems to hush for a moment, as if curious about your progress. Spinning isn't glamorous, it isn't fast, but it's everything. If you don't spin, you don't weave. If you don't weave, no new clothes, no new mittens, no spare socks for when someone dunks their foot through the ice hole again. It's survival in every slow, steady twist. Mainstream historians will tell you that women in Viking-era Iceland were responsible for the majority of textile production. Not just spinning, but weaving, dyeing, mending, and sewing. Fabric was so valuable, it often served as currency. Your hands are quite literally printing money here. But with zero interest and very little return, you roll the spun wool into a ball, tuck it into your basket, and reach for the next clump. Your fingers are already aching. But there's something soothing about it too. The repetition. The soft scrape of carders. The faint squeak of the spinning spindle. The way the wool stretches into thread, then disappears into your lap like magic. You look up occasionally to check on the kids. They're still curled under the bedding, 2 lumps of snoring, twitching limbs. You let them sleep. Later they'll help with the kindling and the slop buckets. But for now, let them dream. There's no rush. Winter won't be going anywhere. The fire pops suddenly, sending a tiny ember sailing toward your sleeve. You swat it reflexively, then check the wool for damage. Nothing. But the smell lingers. Burnt fleece, a scent you could recognize even in your sleep. Which, honestly, you nearly did. Your eyelids are getting heavier than your skirts. You straighten up. You're not allowed to nap. Not yet. There's still mending to do. And soaking. And maybe even dyeing. If you're feeling ambitious. You glance toward the corner where a pot of lichen dye sits cold and forgotten. It smells a bit like wet socks and disappointment. The color it yields isn't spectacular, somewhere between green and brown, but it's clothing. Besides, historians still argue whether the vivid reds and blues found in Norse graves were imports or just rare luxuries. For now, Your clothes will be proudly moss-colored. Thank you very much. A knock at the door breaks your wool-spinning trance. It's not really a knock, more of a thump, followed by the sound of boots stamping snow. You sigh. No such thing as a quiet day. You open the door to reveal Ragnar, your neighbor. Face ruddy with cold, snowflakes clinging to her eyebrows like she's trying to grow a second set. She doesn't say hello. She just stomps inside and shakes off like a wet dog. Got any thread to spare? She asks, already eyeing your yarn basket. And maybe a bit of yesterday's broth. You nod and wordlessly point to the pot. It's not exactly charity. You'll be asking her for extra eggs next week when your hen decides to give up on life again. Icelandic farm economy, based on who owes who what, and whether your husbands are still speaking. Ragnar helps herself to the broth, dips some hard bread in it, and flops down near the fire with the kind of dramatic sigh only someone with 10 children and no chimney can produce. You hand her a ball of spun yarn and get back to your work. For a little while, the only sounds are the soft clicking of her knitting needles and the rhythmic whir of your spindle. You talk a little. Nothing serious. Just gossip about someone's goat who went missing, or the time Thorvald tried to dry cod over a sulfur vent and nearly poisoned himself. The usual. The kids wake up and come dragging their feet across the floor. You hand them small tasks. Refill the woodpile, collect moss from the drying racks, sort the lint. Ragnar shoos your youngest away when he starts poking at her knitting. One of them brings in a little square of butter-wrapped cloth, a snack saved from autumn. You all take turns licking it like it's a sacred relic. Honestly, it kind of is. Butter this time of year is rarer than sunshine. And then, a rare treat. You spot sunlight bouncing off a piece of glass, just a sliver, embedded in a wooden frame that you use as a crude window. The light pours in for only a few minutes, but it warms the space like a whispered secret. You all pause, soaking it in, eyes closed. It won't last. But it's here now. And that's enough. As Ragnar gets up to leave, she wraps her scarf 3 times around her face, muttering something about her husband catching snow fever from walking around barefoot again. You smile, but say nothing. Some battles are just not yours to fight. Once she's gone, you clean up the wool, pack away your tools, and stretch your arms. Your back cracks. Loudly. You ignore it. You still have to check the loom. You trudge across the room, lifting a corner of cloth in progress, a thick blanket to be, half woven. You stroke the weft and sigh. Maybe tomorrow. In the corner of the room, someone has knocked over the ash bucket again. You grab a rag and start wiping, and wiping, and wiping. Because if the ashes get into the wool stash, you'll have to start half your chores over from scratch. You pause, just for a second, resting your elbows on the windowsill. Outside, the landscape is white and endless. Snow curls along the dry stone walls. In the distance, a raven picks at something in the snow, probably regretting its life choices. Inside, the hearth is glowing again. The yarn is stacked neatly. The wool is carded and clean. The spindle rests beside your stool like a tired old friend. You've survived the morning, but the cows still need milking. You bundle up again. You really don't want to, but the cows don't care. They're not going to milk themselves. And if they do, you'd honestly rather not find out how. Your wool cloak, already stiff with yesterday's smoke, wraps around your shoulders like an affectionate burlap sack. You yank your mittens over your raw hands, grab the dented iron pail, and step back out into the cold. The sky is that pale, silvery grey that pretends it isn't snowing. But it is. Tiny flakes swirl aimlessly, clinging to your lashes and nose. The path to the cowshed is well-trodden, but still slippery. You nearly wipe out twice on frozen puddles of manure. Nothing says good morning, like sliding face first toward a steaming pile of yesterday's regrets. You reach the stall, wedge the heavy door open with your hip, and step inside. The air hits you like a sour, steaming curtain. Equal parts body heat, straw, and unwashed cow. You take a deep breath anyway. At least it's warm. Kind of. The cow, your dependable old brindle, lifts her head and blinks at you like you've interrupted something. She's been chewing the same clump of cud since sunrise and regards your presence with zero gratitude. You pat her flank and mutter something comforting, or at least not openly hostile. Mainstream historians agree that Icelandic cattle in the 10th and 11th centuries were smaller than their continental cousins, but incredibly hardy. They had to be. Feed was scarce, and winters were long. Your girl here is no exception. Short-legged, shaggy, built like a wool-covered boulder with attitude. You slide the pail under her and reach for the teats. Ice-cold fingers meet lukewarm udder. She flinches. You flinch. It's not a great moment for either of you. You rub your hands together for friction, blow on them, try again. This time she snorts, shifts her weight, and, you guessed it, steps directly into the pail. You sigh. Deeply. The kind of sigh that makes a crow caw in sympathy somewhere in the distance. You dump the foot milk outside and start over. Eventually, after much coaxing, scolding, and 2 more false starts, you manage to fill half a pail. You tuck it close to your chest and make the slow, careful walk back toward the house. You almost make it. The stone path, slick with half-frozen slush, betrays you. Your foot slips, your arm flails, and the pail tips just enough to splash warm milk down your front. And that, dear listener, is how you end up with a milk-crusted apron that smells like sour cheese until laundry day. Back inside, the fire is down to embers again. You shovel in a few clumps of dried dung, fuel of choice in these parts. Since Iceland isn't exactly overflowing with forests, it catches quickly, giving off that classic burnt poop aroma that every Icelandic home knew all too well. Fringe accounts suggest some households added dried fish skins to the fire for a little extra crackle. You tried it once. Your family threatened mutiny. You stick to dung. You pour what's left of the milk into a clay jug and set it near the hearth. If it doesn't curdle too badly, it'll go into tomorrow's skyer. That is, if the skyer pot hasn't frozen solid again. Your hands are shaking from the cold. You strip off your mittens, blow into your palms, and flex your fingers. The tips are red and raw. One nail is cracked, but there's still mending to do. You pull out the pile of clothing that's been waiting its turn. Socks with heel holes, shirts missing ties, trousers that look like they've fought a losing battle with a wild pig. You thread a needle and start stitching. You don't even have to look anymore. The rhythm is in your bones. Historians still argue whether Icelandic women had access to imported materials for fine sewing, or if everything was strictly homespun. Either way, you're working with what you've got, which today is a thread that keeps snapping and a thimble made from a carved lamb bone. Your middle child waddles over and hands you a burst seam in his tunic. It's the 3rd time this week. He insists it's from growing, but you saw him climbing the roof yesterday. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs and grins. You sigh again. It's become your second language. As you mend, you listen to the soft sounds of your home. The baby snoring, the wind rattling the turf layers on the roof, someone humming tunelessly while sweeping. You've heard the same few folk songs so many times they echo in your dreams. One of them is about a fox who steals eggs and never gets caught. You relate to the fox. After lunch, a watery stew that tastes mostly of boiled roots. You finally sit back, stretch your arms, and stare at the ceiling. You notice a drip forming at one of the seams between turf blocks. Just a little one, for now. You make a mental note to patch the roof. Again. Probably tomorrow, or the next clear day, or the next time it leaks directly onto someone's forehead. The wind picks up, moaning through the doorframe. You wrap your shawl tighter and check the latch. Still holding, for now. You think briefly about bathing, then laugh. There's not enough warm water in all of Iceland to make that worth it right now. Besides, you washed your feet last week. You're practically decadent. Somewhere in the distance, a raven caws. A real one this time. It flaps by the house like it's judging you personally. You flip it a mittened wave and get back to sewing. Your oldest daughter comes to sit beside you, pulling a tangled ball of yarn from her pocket. You help her sort it, gently pulling the strands loose. She's learning to spin, just like you did, and your mother, and hers. The thread never really ends. It just changes hands. And that's the thing about winter in Iceland. It doesn't roar. It whispers. It creeps. It settles in your bones and makes itself at home. And you survive it one stitch, one pail, one sigh at a time. You glance outside. The sun's already slipping. Time for more firewood, maybe even dinner. But first, another patch, another stitch, another breath. Because there's still daylight left. Barely. You're on your knees in front of the hearth again, coaxing the fire back from its usual mid-afternoon sulk. It's a never-ending game of feed, poke, whisper, and beg. The flames sputter. You add another clump of dried dung. They protest with a hiss. Honestly, you're starting to think the fire has a personality, and it doesn't like you. The hearth is the center of everything. Heat, cooking, light, even social status. You've heard stories about households that could keep a fire going without interruption for weeks, even months. That's the dream. Most days, you're happy if it stays lit through a bowl of porridge. Speaking of porridge, that's tonight's dinner. Again. You stir the pot with a carved wooden spoon, scraping at the thick bits that stick to the bottom. They're the best part, if you don't burn them. You add a few flecks of dried lichen, a chunk of salted lamb too small to count as real meat, and a splash of sour whey that smells like it should have been thrown out last week. The kids start gathering around. Not because they're excited to eat, though some of them genuinely are, but because the fire is the only warm spot in the house. You wrap your cloak tighter, ladle out the porridge into mismatched wooden bowls, and pass them around. One of the spoons has a crack. You make a mental note to fix that too. Your mental list now stretches from here to the edge of the lava field. Everyone eats in silence, save for the occasional slurp or argument over who got the biggest chunk of lamb. You don't intervene. If they're still fighting, they're still alive. That's the bar. Once the bowls are scraped clean, some with tongues, you scoop the last few embers into the ash bucket and give the hearth a quick sweep. You toss the scraps to the dog, who eats everything but the boiled lichen. Even he has standards. Then it's back to work. Your next job is to keep the heat in. The turf walls do a decent job insulating, but the wind has found at least 3 new cracks since morning. You stuff them with dried moss, your ever-faithful filler, pulled from the earth, cleaned, dried, and fluffed like a poor woman's insulation foam. It works surprisingly well. Plus, it smells like the outdoors, which is a polite way of saying damp and weirdly spicy. Mainstream scholars agree moss was essential to Icelandic home construction, not just for chinks in walls, but also bedding, cradle stuffing, and even emergency toilet paper. You've used it for all 3, sometimes on the same day. You press a lump of it into a particularly rude, drafty hole, muttering something impolite under your breath. Behind you, one of the kids giggles. Another says, "That one looks like a troll's nose." You squint. They're not wrong. It's time to mend socks. Again. You pull out the pile from the woven basket, some so threadbare they're more hope than fabric, and get to work. Your fingertips are sore, your eyes are tired, and one of the needles is bent at a suspicious angle. but you stitch anyway. The rhythm of it is calming, almost hypnotic. The loop, the tug, the pull, the quiet. Outside, a gust rattles the doorframe, sending a dusting of snow through the top seam. You sigh. Moss time. Again. Ragnar shows up. Again. She bursts in without knocking, cheeks flushed, holding a sack of turnips like a newborn. Trade? She asks, before you've even set down your needle. You squint at her. For what? She shrugs. You'll think of something. You trade her 2 candles and a scrap of boiled cloth that smells faintly of lavender from last summer's bath herbs. She leaves happier than she arrived. You suspect she only came for the gossip anyway. But turnips are turnips. The candles, by the way, are precious. Made from sheep tallow, they're greasy, smoky, and smell faintly of mutton. But at night, they're your only real light. You trim the wick of one carefully, cup the flame, and carry it to the loom. You haven't touched the loom in days. It's enormous, creaky, and eats hours like they're dried berries. But you love it. The tension of the warped threads, the soft slap of the shuttle, the slow appearance of pattern like a secret message unfolding in wool. You weave just a little, 2 rows, maybe 3. The kids are playing in the corner with bones and sticks, pretending to be raiders again. You shake your head. No pillaging inside, you murmur, and they groan. Fringe archaeologists suggest some Icelandic farm children made dolls from bundled wool and carved driftwood. Yours mostly throw moss at each other and argue about whose imaginary longship is fastest. You glance at the fading light through the glass sliver in the wall. It's blue-grey now, dusk. That eerie, in-between hour when shadows stretch and the cold sharpens. You blow out the candle, tighten the door latch, and begin the evening ritual. Kindling stacked, boots by the fire, cloaks hung, tools stowed, prayers murmured. The fire dies down to embers. Someone starts snoring. You tuck in the children, one by one, wrapping them like little swaddled burritos. The baby gets your thickest blanket. Your middle child steals your mittens in his sleep. You don't have the heart to take them back. You settle onto the bench, bones aching, socks damp, shoulders heavy. You fed the animals, spun the wool, stirred the porridge, patched the walls, doused the fire, and bartered turnips for candles you didn't really want to give up. All in a day's work. And it's not even snowstorm season yet. Historians still argue whether farm wives were the true managers of Icelandic households, or if their roles were undervalued by saga writers more interested in swordplay and feuds. You lean toward the former. Not because it's flattering, but because if you stop managing things for one day, this entire house would collapse into chaos and frozen socks. You press your back against the moss-stuffed wall. It's still leaking cold, but just barely. The room settles into silence, the kind that creaks and breathes. You rest your hands on your lap, stare at the glowing embers, and let yourself sit still for the first time since dawn. Tomorrow will bring more dung, more drafts, more slippery stone, more gossip, more thread. But for now, in the hush of the firelight, you let yourself feel one fleeting, scandalous thought. You're doing okay. You blink awake in the dark. Again. But this time, it's not the sheep. It's the wind. Louder now. Angrier. Like some restless spirit battering the walls with frozen fists. The turf groans. The rafters creak. A loose flap of leather on the roof taps rhythmically like it's trying to compose its own saga. You shift under your woolen blanket. Everything hurts a little. Your knees, your back, your shoulders. The weight of winter is not metaphorical here. It's physical. Like someone has gently draped an anvil across your entire spine. You rise slowly, barefoot for now, wincing as the cold floor bites. You make your way toward the hearth, stepping over a snoring child and nearly tripping on someone's wooden spoon. You use a bit of moss to relight the fire, careful not to wake the house. The flame hisses to life, tiny but determined. You're not getting back to sleep anytime soon, so you do what farm wives have always done when sleep won't come. You work. Quietly. By candlelight, you check the stores. Salted fish, dried berries, blackened bits of sausage, 3 remaining eggs tucked in straw, and a nearly empty jar of butter. Not bad, but not great. The butter is mostly wishful thinking at this point. You swirl it and set it back gently, like it might grow if you're kind enough. You roll up your sleeves and start gutting fish from yesterday's catch. The guts plop into the scrap bucket with wet little sighs. Your hands are cold, but they know the job. Slit, scrape, rinse. Repeat. The cat appears silently beside you. You toss him a tiny liver. He disappears with it like a ghost. Mainstream history often glances past this hour, the quiet middle of the night work. But it's where the margin of survival was built. Not in battles or alliances, but in the steady knife work over a fish gut bowl when everyone else was asleep. You move on to laundry. Just a few things. A soiled tunic, 2 pairs of woolen socks, and 1 suspiciously sticky rag. You soak them in a bucket near the fire, scrubbing gently with the ashes and snowmelt. The tunic turns the water grey. The rag, well, you don't ask questions. You just wash. Then, sewing. A torn curtain. A mitten chewed at the cuff. You sit by the fire, thread the needle, and start stitching. Your eyes sting. Your shoulders droop. But your hands don't stop. They never do. Eventually you hear stirring. One of the older girls, rubbing sleep from her eyes, squints at you. "You up already?" she mumbles. "Still," you whisper, smiling. She yawns and curls beside you. You wrap your arm around her, careful not to drop the needle. Outside, the wind dies just slightly. Now comes the final stretch. The last quiet chores before bed truly calls you. You check the pregnant ewe. She's restless, pacing in her little stall, belly low, eyes alert. You murmur to her softly, rub her ears, and stuff extra straw into the pen. She won't birth tonight. Probably. Hopefully. Historians still argue whether Icelandic women acted as midwives for animals as well as people. You know the answer. Of course they did. When there's no one else, you are the expert. You return inside. Your body hums with exhaustion, but the house is ready for sleep. The fire is banked, the hearth swept, the tools put away. One last glance around. No drips from the roof, no breezes under the door, no cat stealing butter. You crawl into bed, pulling the covers over your shoulders. The hay-stuffed mattress creaks. Your toes seek the warm spot you left earlier. Someone snores softly nearby. You smile. You think briefly of summer. Long days, endless light, green fields. You think of lambs and berry picking, and maybe even swimming, if the water doesn't turn your bones to ice. But winter is still here, still deep in your bones, and it will be for a while longer. And yet, you've made it through another day, another night. You fed, mended, soothed, stitched, milked, bartered, and mothered your way toward morning. Tomorrow will come, with more moss, more porridge, more cold wind and burnt fingers. But for now, you can rest, and when that work was done, another day began. somewhere else with someone else. We're slipping quietly into a snow-drifted corner of 18th century France. Outside your little timber house, the landscape is frosted white and muffled by silence. The thatched roofs of your village are hunched under heavy snow, chimneys bleeding thin trails of smoke into the grey sky. The wooden door creaks from last night's frost. And inside, well, your breath is visible. You can actually see your breath. Welcome to winter in a 1700s French village. You probably won't survive this. The first thing you do in the morning, of course, is not get out of bed. Your wool blanket is itchy and smells faintly of sheep, but it's the only thing standing between you and the glacial air of your one-room cottage. Your chamber pot is somewhere under the bed, freezing its ceramic bottom off, but you pretend not to notice. The bed straw crackles beneath you as you brace yourself for the sprint across cold stone floors. Once up, your breath hangs in the air like a ghost. The fire in the hearth has died down overnight, so now begins the ritual of fire coaxing. You crouch by the ashes, poking gently with a stick, whispering sweet nothings to whatever ember might still be alive. If you're lucky, and you remembered to bank the fire last night under a crust of ash, there's a faint glow. You cradle it with dry moss or straw, blowing carefully like you're inflating a newborn's lungs. If not, well, get your boots on. You'll need to run to your neighbors and beg a bit of fire before your fingers stiffen into pickles. Lighting a fire isn't just about staying warm. It's the only way to make breakfast. Bread, mostly. Yesterday's loaf, which is now hard enough to qualify as a weapon. You chip off a slice and warm it over the flame. Maybe with a smear of lard or a drizzle of honey if you're fancy. There's no coffee unless you're nobility or have strange connections in the port towns. Most mornings, it's a weak grain broth or chicory root tea, what historians politely call ersatz coffee, and what you call mud. Outside, the frost has painted your windows glass, if you're lucky enough to have glass, with white feathery trails. More likely though, your window is closed with a wooden shutter, and the only light comes through the smoke hole above the hearth. Everything is smoky. You are smoky. Your clothes smell like fire. Your hair smells like fire. You are one human-shaped ember waiting to be extinguished. And your clothes? There's no changing into something warmer. You're already wearing it. You slept in most of your outfit. Linen shirt, wool petticoats or breeches, thick socks, hand knit if you're lucky, a wool shawl you wrap 3 times around your shoulders, and maybe a hat. Indoors. Yes, you wear a hat indoors. Everybody does. Once the fire is going and your breath isn't entirely icy vapor, you move on to checking the bread cupboard. It's a wooden box suspended from the ceiling by ropes, mostly to keep the mice out. You gently open it. There's a good chance everything is frozen. Bread freezes, cheese freezes, leftover porridge freezes into sad beige bricks. In a village winter, your enemies are not wolves or war. They're mold, mildew, and moisture, and mice. Always the mice. Back at the hearth, a few coals finally catch and glow bright. You feed in dry sticks one at a time, grateful you chopped enough kindling yesterday. Firewood isn't cheap or easy. The forest is technically owned by the local seigneur or noble, and every branch you collect without permission technically makes you a thief. There's an entire French legal code from the period that punishes villagers for unauthorized twig gathering. Historians still argue whether rural families regularly broke these rules, or if they were too afraid of fines and flogging to risk it. You suspect the answer lies somewhere in the middle, and possibly in the woodpile behind your neighbor's house. By now, the smoke from your hearth has found its usual escape route. Up, across the rafters, and out through the loose thatch. Chimneys exist, yes, but many village homes still use the old smoke loft design. No chimney, just a smoke hole and the occasional cough-induced prayer. If nothing else, the smoke helps cure the hams hung up near the ceiling. That's right, there's a pig leg above your bed. You're welcome. With the fire steady, it's time to warm water. Enough to rinse your face, maybe. Washing, of course, is a luxury. Full body baths are rare in winter. Soap is homemade and stings a bit, especially when it's half frozen. But the face must be presentable in case anyone drops by, or in case you need to head to church. The village priest doesn't care if your soul is clean. He just wants your fingernails to be less terrifying. You might let the kids sleep in a bit longer. They're all tucked in the same bed, a bundle of elbows and frosty noses. You toss an extra blanket or an old goat pelt over them before stepping outside briefly to check the sky. Still grey, still cold, still the 1700s. One last ritual before chores. Ash spreading. You scoop yesterday's ashes into a tin bowl and sprinkle them across icy patches near the door. Salt's too expensive. Sand freezes, but ash is free and gritty and keeps you from breaking a hip on your own doorstep. Fun fact, some households used ash not just for traction, but also to deodorize outhouses and scrub pots. You, dear villager, are living in an era where wood ash is both your bath bomb and your Febreze. Inside again, you finally let yourself sit, briefly, on the edge of the wooden stool. You sip your warm broth, listen to the fire crackle, and feel the heat creep up your legs from the hearthstone. You survived another winter morning. Only about 90 more to go before spring. The day hasn't even fully begun. But now that the fire's going and your bones have thawed just enough to move without snapping, it's time for winter chores. And no, there's no such thing as a snow day. Unless the roof caves in or you lose a finger, you're still expected to keep things running. First stop is the animals. You tie a wool scarf around your mouth and nose. Less for warmth, more to keep the goat stink out of your lungs, and head out to the barn. Or rather, the barn, which is a glorified lean-to made of timber and mud, with more gaps than walls. The animals inside, goats, chickens, maybe a tired cow, are huddled together in a heap of steamy, snorting misery. The goats eye you suspiciously, their breath puffing like dragons. One of them has icicles hanging from his beard, and he looks oddly proud of it. Your job is to feed them, of course, and make sure their water isn't frozen solid. It is frozen solid. So you do what you always do. Take a hammer to it. There's something satisfying about whacking a bucket of ice until it gives up. Less satisfying is pouring more precious fire-warmed water into it, knowing full well it'll freeze again by sundown. You sigh and sprinkle hay, checking to see if the cow's udder is in the mood to cooperate. Some mornings it's just too cold for her to give anything. Other mornings you manage to squeeze out enough milk to warm up and share between the kids later. The chickens, meanwhile, resent the entire concept of snow. They refuse to step outside their coop. You gather eggs with numb fingers, knowing some may already be frozen and cracked. Eggs don't wait for your schedule. If they freeze before you find them, they're done for. Another morning mystery. Are these edible or egg-shaped grenades? Back outside, the cold bites deeper now. The wind smells like chimney smoke and wet wool. You trudge to the woodpile and load your arms with whatever's driest, trying not to drop a log onto your toe. There's never enough firewood. Everyone complains about it, especially since firewood isn't just for warmth, it powers everything. Cooking, boiling laundry, heating water, drying wet shoes, fending off existential dread. It's fuel, heat, therapy, an occasional light source all in one. Then laundry. Oh, sweet summer child. If you thought washing clothes was bad in modern times, welcome to the nightmare version. In winter, washing involves hauling buckets of barely warm water from the hearth, scrubbing linens with lye soap on a wooden board, and hanging everything up in the attic or near the fire. Outside drying? Ha! The shirts will freeze solid, and you'll end up cracking sleeves like kindling. Some villagers don't even bother fully drying their clothes. They just freeze dry them, then beat them with a stick until they behave. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just desperation turned tradition. Lye soap, by the way, is homemade from ashes and fat. Yes, the same ash you scattered outside this morning, mixed with the leftover grease from butchering season. It stings, it smells faintly of pig, and it gets the job done. Your hands are raw, your knuckles red. The soap doesn't just clean, it judges you. Another vital job? Clearing snow from the thatch. Let it sit too long, and the weight collapses the roof. So you climb up with a rake or broom, and push at the edges, watching sheets of snow tumble down like silent avalanches. You move slowly, careful not to step on weak spots. Some villagers fall through every year, and no one wants to be the one who lands in the goat pen. If you're lucky, today isn't your turn to help with communal duties, like maintaining the village well. That thing freezes regularly, and it's everyone's problem. A few men will take turns hacking the ice away, muttering curses at the stone rim, and wondering if it would be easier to melt snow instead. It's not. Snow is too airy. It takes forever to produce drinkable water. But sometimes when you're desperate, you scoop armfuls of it into a pot and let it sizzle down over the fire like it's some rare delicacy. Which, in winter, it kind of is. The sun hasn't exactly risen. It's more like it's thinking about it. A low, pale disk hangs just above the tree line, doing its best to pretend it matters. Shadows are long and blue. You measure your progress not in hours but in warmth. How long your cheeks take to thaw when you step inside. How quickly your mittens soak through. You don't have a clock, but you can tell when your boots have reached wet and tragic on stage. That means it's around midday. Back indoors, you kick off your damp shoes and warm your hands by the fire. The hearth is the center of everything. Warmth, life, survival. You keep a pot of something simmering constantly. Today it might be root vegetable soup, mostly turnips and leeks, maybe a bit of barley. If you're very lucky, there's a sliver of salt pork in there, floating like a rare pearl. The kids, now awake, get assigned their own chores. One's mending socks, another is gathering kindling from the hedgerow. The youngest is picking lice out of her sister's hair with the concentration of a medieval surgeon. You've taught them all to be useful, because you have to. Winter doesn't allow for spectators. It's here, amid the crackling fire and soup-scented air, that you pause, just for a second. You lean back, listen to the wind outside, and marvel that anyone ever thought this was a good place to live. But it is. Somehow, it is. There's a stubborn charm in the routine, in knowing your ancestors did this too. Woke up shivering, smashed ice out of buckets, and milked grumpy goats until their fingers stopped working. And as odd as it sounds, there's comfort in repetition, in the rhythm of chores, in the smell of wet wool drying by the fire, in the scraping of chairs and the rustle of bread crusts being broken. Besides, spring is only 3 months away, probably, by the time the sun gives up and slips behind the hills, somewhere around mid-afternoon in this sleepy little stretch of 1700s France. The day's rhythm changes. Not slower necessarily, just different. The light outside fades fast, and what little seeps in through the shutter cracks turns blue, like winter is tinting the whole world melancholy. But inside your cottage, things begin to warm up, not just from fire, but from the home of indoor life. Your small home becomes a gathering space, not just for your family, but sometimes for neighbors too. Fireside hours are for mending, storytelling, and the quiet kinds of labor that make long winters bearable. There's no privacy, of course. Everyone's crammed together in one room, parents, children, ailing grandparents, and the occasional chicken that's decided she lives indoors now. You step around her and settle into your place near the hearth. Your needlework basket waits for you. Socks need darning. Trousers have holes again. The thread is scratchy linen, and the needle's blunt from overuse. But you've done this so often your hands could stitch by memory. Mending isn't glamorous. It's just what keeps everyone dressed. One historian described peasant clothing as patched into eternity, and it shows. Every elbow, every knee, every cuff tells a story of falling into the pig pen or kneeling in the snow too long. Over in the corner, someone's carding wool, combing it into soft, fluffy piles ready for spinning. The spindle spins lazily between fingers, and every so often, it gets tangled. There's a sigh, a muttered curse, a shrug, and then the spinning resumes. It's almost meditative, really. Spinning while someone else tells a story. The kind with more talking animals than plot. Tonight, your oldest child is poking at the floorboards with a stick, trying to chase a mouse without disturbing the dog. The dog is too old to care. She lies half-roasted by the hearth, belly rising and falling slowly, snoring like someone gently sawing wood. If she's alive, she's warm enough. If she's not, well, you'll deal with that tomorrow. Lice combing time resumes. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary. You part your youngest's hair with a wooden comb and start checking row by row. Everyone has them. It's not a question of if, just how many. Powdered herbs and vinegar might help, but the best method is just sheer persistence. You kill what you can see and hope for the best. Historians still argue whether 18th century villagers considered lice a shameful thing or just another seasonal nuisance, like frostbite or gout. Either way, you're too tired to care. Evenings are when gossip thrives. You hear things: whose chickens have stopped laying, who got caught sneaking into the Lord's orchard, whose cousin from the next village over married a woman with actual teeth. Scandalous. There's not much to do in winter, so stories get longer, details get juicier, and imagination fills in what memory forgets. It's also when the parish priest might drop by, or one of his helpers. Just checking in, making sure no one's plotting heresy or hiding contraband Protestant pamphlets under the floorboards. You smile, offer him some soup, and try to look very Catholic. He eyes the bookshelf. You don't have one, which is reassuring for both of you. Sometimes the neighbor's boy visits, bringing his mother's spindle or some dried apples to share. He's sweet on your daughter. She pretends not to notice, even though she spent the last hour braiding her hair in increasingly elaborate designs. She sits by the fire, pointedly not looking in his direction, while stirring the soup with more enthusiasm than necessary. You pretend not to notice either. Dinner is quiet. Not solemn, just quiet. Everyone's tired. The soup has softened into something thicker now, almost stew. You ladle it into wooden bowls and pass around crusts of bread, sliced thinner than usual, because flour's getting scarce again. Someone asks if there's any cheese. There isn't, but you smile and say you'll check tomorrow. Afterward, the bowls are wiped clean with the last of the bread, and the children help clear the table. You don't wash dishes in the modern sense, just a quick rinse with hot water and maybe a wipe with ash paste. It's enough. Your standards are practical. No one's licking their bowls, at least not out loud. Then comes a rare treat, a candle. Most nights, you live by firelight. Candles are expensive. Homemade tallow ones smell faintly of old sheep and goopy fat. But tonight, you light one anyway, just for a while. Its little flame dances on the table, casting shadows that move like lazy ghosts across the ceiling. Someone tells a story about a traveling peddler who got caught in the snow with nothing but a donkey and a barrel of pickled fish. No one remembers the ending, but everyone laughs anyway. You tuck the children into the loft bed, high up near the ceiling where the warmth lingers longer. The roof is low enough up there that they have to crawl in like nesting birds. The straw's been replaced recently, and the wool blanket is heavy but comforting. They wriggle in, whispering to each other, breath fogging the air like tiny chimneys. You and your spouse settle by the hearth for a moment longer. There's mending left to finish, but your eyes are heavy. The fire's low again. You bank it with a careful layer of ash, just like you did last night, hoping it survives till morning. Then comes one last sound. A knock. Just 3 soft taps. You open the door to find your neighbor, wrapped in a cloak, holding out a jar. It's rendered goose fat, collected from their butchering day. She doesn't say much, just nods. You nod back. This is how people survive winter. Not alone, not without fire, not without goose fat and awkward silences. The door closes, the latch clicks, the candle's wick flickers out, and all is quiet again. Morning comes again, with the usual sequence of frozen toes, stiff fingers, and a fire that barely held on through the night. You repeat your little ritual with the coals and the ash, and once the hearth breathes warm again, you sit beside it and stare at the shelf holding what's left of your food. Winter doesn't just chill your bones, it shrinks your pantry. And right now, yours is starting to look dangerously optimistic. You've got turnips, a string of onions so shriveled they resemble curse ingredients, and a block of cheese that could double as a blunt weapon. Somewhere behind the flour sack is a jar of pickled beets, bright, sour, and suspiciously fizzy. You sniff the lid. Risky, but probably edible. Maybe. Food in the village is a season-long negotiation with scarcity. All the preserving was done back in the fall, and now you're living off the results. Root cellars keep things cold and dark, but not always dry. Potatoes sprout if you don't check them. Carrots turn to mush. The cabbages are fine, though they do make the cellar smell like something died and came back slightly cabbage-scented. Most households keep smoked meats in the rafters. A bit of pork, maybe some sausage links. You've got a few still hanging, safe from mice and human temptation. They're precious, not for daily use. More like a meat savings account. One good snowfall and someone always tries to sneak a bite. One bite, and suddenly there's half a sausage left, and a very guilty child pretending they've never even heard of meat. A major staple is soup, always soup. Everything becomes soup. Yesterday's soup becomes today's porridge. Today's porridge becomes tomorrow's dumplings. You stretch flour with acorn meal. You cut spoiled bits off apples and mash what's left into little tarts, sweetened with honey if you have it, or boiled beet juice if you're feeling experimental. Let's just say not every culinary invention is a triumph. Sometimes you trade with neighbors. Not with coins, those are rare and mostly reserved for taxes, but with eggs, or a square of lard, or that one amazing herbal salve old Margot makes with garlic and something she won't name. You once swapped a pair of mittens for a tiny pot of wild boar pate. It lasted exactly 1 meal, but you still think about it. Foraging, even in winter, is a real thing. You've learned how to find rose hips, dig frozen roots, even recognize tree bark that kind of works as tea. Birch bark, pine needles, dried nettles. Is it tasty? No. But is it warm and not fatal? Usually. Every so often you hear rumors of flour deliveries from larger towns, that the mill downriver had a surplus, that someone's cousin's friend is bringing extra lentils from the market. You don't get your hopes up. Roads are frozen or impassable. Horses stumble, carts break. Even when supplies do make it through, the seigneur or landowner gets the lion's share. Villagers get what's left, which, according to one preserved 18th century ledger, often amounted to a 4th loaf, partly consumed by rats. Still, you make do. That's what you always do. Tonight, it's boiled barley with dried herbs, and maybe a few strips of turnip. You'll tell the kids are just like noodles. They won't believe you. but they'll eat them anyway. And when things get really lean, there's always the grain box. You've kept it hidden, wrapped in old linen, tucked behind the hearthstones. Just a few handfuls of wheat, saved from last year's harvest, meant for planting. But in an emergency, it could become gruel. Historians still argue whether families commonly dipped into their seed stock or treated it as sacred and untouchable. You suspect it depends on how hungry your children look and how long until the thaw. Hunger is communal. No one pretends otherwise. Everyone is thin this time of year, and the village priest speaks more about spiritual fasting than actual feasting. Once a week, the poorest receive a ladle of grain from the parish storehouse, assuming it hasn't already been borrowed by those slightly less poor but equally hungry. You've stood in that line before. You might again soon. Despite all this, there are odd comforts. The process of making food is familiar, even calming. You grind what's left of your flour with a stone, your arms aching, but your mind gently drifting. You stir slow soups while watching snowflakes gather on the window pane. You roast chestnuts when you can get them, their shells crackling and smoky. They're not filling, but they smell like holiday. Occasionally you dream about butter, the creamy kind, spread thick on warm bread. It's a luxury, rarely made in winter, unless your cow is an overachiever. You once saved up to buy a butter mold carved with a tiny sun. You've only used it twice, but it's tucked safely away in the linen chest. Your little reminder that someday the cows will graze again, and the butter will be soft and golden. The kids ask sometimes, when will the garden grow again? And you answer with lies that feel like kindness. Soon, you say. Just a few more cold nights. They nod. You all know better, but it helps to pretend. At night, you dream about feast days. Of Easter hams and soft rolls, and the taste of wild strawberries picked fresh from the roadside. You dream of honey cakes and roasted apples, of meals where no one asks, is there more? Because there is more. These dreams carry you through the quiet ache of midwinter meals. Simple, small, and endlessly creative. Tonight's dinner is turnip mash with a poached egg and a sliver of dried onion. You arrange it carefully, like it matters. Everyone eats slowly. The fire crackles. The shadows grow long again. And you? You scrape your bowl clean, tuck your little grain box deeper into its hiding place, and tell yourself one more lie. It'll be spring before you know it. Another day fades into blue dusk, and though the fire crackles low and your back is sore from a full rotation of chores, there's something faintly magical about this time of year. Not magical in the everything is lovely kind of way, but magical in the how are we still alive sense. Because as bleak as the winter months are, they're also filled with the small, odd comforts of tradition. And for a 1700s French village like yours, the calendar offers just enough festivals, saints' days, and rituals to keep morale from collapsing completely. Tonight, you hear distant church bells, a soft clang echoing down the valley. It's Candlemas Eve, or maybe St. Genevieve's Day, or possibly both. It's hard to keep track when the church observes something every few days, but each celebration is a good excuse to light candles, gather together, and remind yourself that spring hasn't forgotten you. It's just running very, very late. You open the small wooden box where you store the stubs of old candles, little chunks of wax saved from Christmastide, funerals, baptisms, and moments you thought needed a little more light. You melt them together in a clay dish, and with a piece of rag for a wick, voila! One lopsided, slightly sad, ceremonial candle. But it flickers just the same. The children watch in fascination, their faces lit by the glow. You recite part of an old prayer you half remember. Something about protection from wolves and floods and bad harvests. You don't know if it works, but the rhythm of the words is soothing. The wax drips onto the table. You don't mind. It's not every day you get to pretend you're fancy. Tomorrow, if the weather isn't too cruel, some of the villagers will head to church. Not just for mass, but to bless their candles for the year ahead. You've got one ready, wrapped in linen, hidden near your shawl. Not because you're overly pious, but because a blessed candle is supposed to protect your house from lightning strikes. And considering how much your roof leaks, divine insurance seems wise. Some nights bring even more excitement, like the Feast of St. Blaise, when children are brought to the altar for throat blessings. The priest holds 2 crossed candles near their necks and prays they'll be spared from choking or coughing in the coming year. Your youngest thinks it's hilarious. Your eldest thinks it's a little creepy. You think anything that keeps the flu away is worth a shot. And then there's the hay. Every winter you stuff shoes with hay for the children. Not as insulation, though honestly it helps, but as a nod to the 3 kings. On the eve of Epiphany, each child fills their shoes with straw and leaves them by the hearth. In the morning, if they've been good, translation, didn't spill the soup or let the goat inside, the straw is replaced with dried fruit, nuts, or a bit of hard candy from the shop in town. You still don't know who started that tradition, but it's been going on so long, even the priest just shrugs and mutters something about local customs. Festival food, of course, is different from survival food. You save special ingredients for special days. Honeyed cakes baked flat on the hearthstone. Chestnut flour pancakes folded and crisp at the edges. A little mulled cider if you can manage it. Sometimes the neighbors gather, each bringing their own meager treat, and suddenly the table feels full. Not with food, necessarily, but with warmth. Even in winter there's music. Not instruments, usually. Those are rare. But songs. Rhymes and rounds passed down from grandmothers to children, like secret recipes. You hum while mending, whistle while sweeping, and sing softly when the wind howls just a little too loud outside. One of your neighbors once insisted that singing during snowstorms keeps the spirits away. You don't believe it exactly, but you don't not believe it either. And of course, there are the arguments. Winter togetherness, no matter how sweet, means you eventually get on each other's nerves. Someone leaves the door open too long. Someone knocks over the grain jar. Someone won't stop loudly chewing the last turnip. Voices rise, feet stomp, maybe a spoon gets thrown, and then someone laughs. Because in a village this small, you have to forgive quickly. There's no such thing as staying mad when you're sharing a fire. You think about the people who've survived winters here before you. The grandparents who said, "This one's not so bad," while covered in frost. The great aunt who used to knit with her feet in a bucket of hot ash. The old farmer who always claimed he could smell snow 3 days in advance. They weren't all wise, but they were stubborn. And stubborn, as it turns out, is a survival strategy. One more log on the fire. One more bowl rinsed. One more night wrapped in scratchy wool and the breath of sleeping children. The wind has calmed. The rafters creak gently. A mouse scuttles across the floor and is promptly ignored. Everything you own smells like smoke. Everything you wear feels like it's been worn 1,000 times. And you're still here. Not thriving exactly, but here. You snuff the last candle and settle into bed, your back to the wall, one arm over the child who wriggled down beside you. The room goes quiet. Outside, a dog barks once, then goes silent. You close your eyes and wait for sleep. And for the first time in days, it comes easily. Now just let yourself drift a little. You've lit the last candle, tucked everyone in, and banked the fire so it glows softly beneath the ash. The air is heavy with the scent of old wood smoke and wool. You can still hear the faint creak of the rafters, the sleepy murmurs of children, and the whispering wind curled against the shutters like a cat. Everything that needed doing has been done. well enough. The water buckets are filled. The goats are quiet. The grain is hidden safely in its sack. There's nothing urgent left. Nothing sharp waiting for you in the next hour. Just stillness. You stretch your legs beneath the quilt. The straw mattress shifts quietly beneath you. A lull settles over the cottage, like someone pressed pause on time itself. Even the fire seems to breathe slower now, coals glowing red like tired eyes. You are warm. You are full, in your own humble way. And above all else, you are not alone. Winter is long. The days are short. But inside this little room, you've made light from scraps, and calm from noise, and home from whatever the season didn't take. So close your eyes. Let the cold stay outside, and sleep deeply as the village sleeps with you.